Okay, I'll start over. We're going to cover the 9 elements of composition. That's very, very important for all of you because you'll need to use all 9 elements if you want to be on your papers. And that will be 4 weeks from tonight, your papers will be due. So you have some time. Okay, now I think we're going to be getting a few late joiners, more than usual, because I invited the other class, my Wednesday night class, to join us because what happened Wednesday, I have no idea why, but it did not record. It stopped recording about 5 minutes into the lecture, just as I was getting to the information on the board behind me. So I'm going to go ahead and bring up the speaker view now. Hang on just a second. That should, yeah, there we go. So you can see behind my head here. Somebody needs to turn off their mic or temporarily. Okay, we're going to cover everything that's on that board. It's also the same list exactly as the one I send all of you as a PDF. And I will get to that in a few minutes. That's, 1-page handout with the definitions on them. And I will go over them each carefully, and you'll see my rather poor artistic skills. My dad used to call it Mickey Mouse work. He actually was talented. I didn't inherit those genes, but I'll be able to illustrate adequately for you things like balance and shading or modeling. Several of the elements are the type of features the artists will use, or some artists will use in their works, where they lend themselves to physical demonstrations, others just a verbal definition, but we'll go over each one's carefully, thoroughly, and you can ask questions at any point. Please feel free to do that. That's what we're here for. Okay, I have a few announcements to make before we proceed with that part of the lecture. So in other words, the first half of the class, probably slightly less than half. We shouldn't need to take an hour and 15 minutes, but about an hour with depending on how many questions are with these 9 elements. And we'll take a slightly earlier break, and we'll begin our Renaissance art slides, and those could be on the midterm. So you definitely want to stick around and take notes. And at this point, I don't imagine anybody has yet not seen the handouts I sent. I always respond if someone said they didn't come through on their web or email inbox, which they ought to, but if you gave, obviously it's up to you to give the college the inbox or email account you want them, any college instructor, to use. That's what automatically should go to everybody. So this is the handout we're going to be talking about in a few minutes, and it's mostly going to be done as a show and tell with the board behind me. In case you're curious, I'm coming to you from the other side of my bedroom. I turned the laptop camera around 180 degrees, and that wall is the only space big enough in my house for a whiteboard to demonstrate all these elements. And I have been doing this now for over 20 years, and usually it helps students a lot. By the end of this session, you start to understand how those terms apply to each work of art that we cover in class, plus the ones you write about on your papers. But first, a couple of announcements. Okay. One is that some people have sent me their bios, their mini bios, in some format that I can't open. And every assignment, this is not my rule, it's the college, the JC's rule. All the assignments you submit for grading need to be sent as PDFs, and all of my documents need to be sent to you as PDFs. So when I can't open something, I will usually take the extra step of saying, please resend this. But if I don't, and you didn't know if you got credit for whatever, that could be a problem. I doubt that'll happen. I'm pretty thorough, but I might overlook something when I get dozens of emails a day, right, for each of my classes. So sometimes, not every day. So it's incumbent on everybody in all SRJC classes to please send all of your documents. You can email me regularly on either of the campus email or my mark. Again, it's on the handouts I gave you guys last week that we went over. The 2 handouts, the syllabus at the top of the page, and again at the top of the page in the course and grading policies are my email addresses. But the preferred one, certainly for all assignments, it's best to submit them to Mark markw at AOL.com. That way I will be able to track them much more easily. It's a much easier website to navigate, believe it or not, than Outlook. Outlook is just cumbersome for a lot of reasons. So please try to always do that. I will, before your papers are due, in fact, next week, I will have another set of handouts that will tell you what the requirements are. We'll go over those together at the beginning of next week's class, because then there'll be 3 more weeks after that before your papers are due. So don't forget to attend that part of next week's class so you can ask any questions that aren't obvious. But that handout was a 1-page, 5 requirements for your short papers, it's called, plus a sample paper. I just started doing that digitally after my one of my readers, who's very savvy, showed me how I could do that. So you can print those out and look at them, or just look at them, you know, in your downloads. And that'll be about a 4 or 5, I think it's 5-page sample of an A paper from a past class. One of your fellow students has given me permission to use for your benefit. So you want to be here for that class next week, the start of week 3. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and call out the names. This is what I did with the other Wednesday class. This is my way of sort of not taking roll, but covering all the bases. I'm not going to call everybody's name out. Most people have sent me their mini bios and I could open most of them, but there were a few who didn't. So this is just for your benefit. I need them no later than Friday. I would say noon to be safe, because I'm going to Friday afternoon. I'm required to turn in a drop no-show. It's called drop list. And I don't want to drop anyone who just happens to have forgotten to send in their mini bio. That's how I know you do want to continue in the class. So here are the people I have not in Art 1.2. So if you're a guest from 1.1, your name's not on this list. Okay, so I'll say it slowly. And if you have a question, you think you sent it to me, then just speak up. It must mean I didn't get it or I couldn't open it. There's not that many. Just take 10 or 12 names. Okay, Joseph Abraham, Bill Bisignani, Finn Clapp with 2 P's. Okay, Anicia Franklin, Morgan Hartman, Yenqing Lin, Vic Love, Lady, it's Leydy, right? Requena, I think Requena or Requena, Oscar Rios Barragon, Travis Strunk, and Constance Tanner. All I'm doing is trying to give you a heads up if your name was one of those I just called, that I still need your mini bios. Remember, the 3 things are that you need to say. You can keep it to just 2 or 3 sentences for each, half page. First, where you have lived and you know, studied, what educational background you might have, and where you've lived and traveled. Second would be your work experience, or if you only have educational experiences and no job experience, that's fine. Mention your background, education, just how much, you know, more recent, say, since high school, or high school and later. And lastly, what is your experience with art? That's it. Okay, so that's all there is.
I have a quick question, Professor.
Sure, please go ahead.
Yes, so I missed the last class, and I was very sick.
I understand.
And I don't see on the dashboard the class, the art class.
Are you talking about Canvas?
Yes.
I've said, well, you weren't here, but I also send emails. I don't use Canvas. I just use the direct email. It's much less cumbersome and complicated. It's been working fine for me for 2 semesters since we did the shutdown. And all your grades will be through, you submit, I just said you'll submit them to me directly on my AOL email, which I just said. So you can, if you didn't write it, you just look it up the top of your syllabus, you'll see it, my AOL email. So no Canvas is involved in this class, okay? So don't worry about that.
So,
all right.
Okay, so homeworks will be also...
That's right.
Do we have any
Daisy,
thank
you, Daisy. She just put a little notice up. I hope you can all see it, that everything is done. It's pretty straightforward. I'm trying to keep things simple for both my, well, your sake and mine, but also for my readers that help me. Great. Okay,
Okay.
let's move on. But unless you had a question about your mini bio, I just told you what's included, so I'm not going to repeat that. But if you didn't, if you're one of the people you heard call your name out, then you do want to get that done. If not tonight, then I'd say tomorrow, or certainly Thursday at the latest, so that I can then have a complete list of everyone who wants to continue with the class. Okay, moving on. Just one or two more quick announcements. I have a really good movie to recommend, and you can get 10 points extra credit for just writing a brief summary. Well, I said 2 pages, so let's say, yeah, okay, that's a little bit of work, but it's an easy movie to watch. My wife and I watched it last Saturday. It's on, it's free on Netflix. Well, if you have Netflix, I think it's free regardless. I can't remember. Anyway, the point is, it is a Netflix special, they call that, and it is a brilliant movie about the true story of the finding of the oldest medieval royal, right, as in king, artifact or gravesite ever found in Britain. And the man who found it was an amateur. He wasn't trained, but he taught himself. And of course, the bigwigs, the PhDs, and everybody with all the fancy degrees came down from London. This is in England in the 1930s. In fact, it's the year World War II began. That's part of the story. The war is starting to happen in the skies above them as they're digging. It's called The Dig. Very easy title to remember. You might want to jot it down or just Google it or put it in your phone. The Dig, simple short title. Ralph Fiennes, if you don't know who he is, you should. He's one of the best British actors of the last generation. Plays the true character. And there's romance in it, and there's conflict, and there's even, suppressed, well, what can I say? I don't want to give away too much. It's not just about digging in the dirt for artifacts. That's only a part of it. Beautifully filmed in a part of England, southern England, where there's the most historic areas of England. And they found a gravesite from 600 AD. And those items are all on display at the British Museum, which this man then agreed with his sponsor, the two of them, to let the British Museum have them. It's really good. Again, I'll say, yeah, slowly, 2 words, The Dig, D-I-G, on Netflix. It's a Netflix special, I think they call it, or exclusive. It should be on their homepage, but you can look it up under movies. It just came out on the 31st. I recommend it. You watch it and you write two.
So that.
Sorry, go ahead.
2 pages on The Dig, and
what you learned from the movie, yeah, and what you thought about frankly, it's not about the life of an artist. So I'm stretching that, but I want to give you guys, some flexibility. Stretching the requirement for extra credit, which is usually you have to watch a movie or a documentary about an artist's life. This is different. It's about archaeologists, but they found artifacts that are in a museum and belong to the world now. I mean, anyone can go see them. I've seen them in London, and they're amazing. And they are the best preserved medieval website, the best preserved medieval website you ever heard of. Sorry, that's misspeak. The best preserved medieval grave site ever found in, I think, all of Europe. I'm pretty sure. It's an amazing story. True story, all of it, including the various romantic interactions and things. So it's about an hour and 45 minutes. So then you just write 2 pages, or almost, at least keep it over a page and a half, of a few paragraphs of what you learned about the actual events and what you thought about the movie, sort of like your own review, and you get 10 points if you turn that in as a PDF. Okay, one more short announcement. I've had a few people tell me they couldn't log in. I don't imagine that's true for anybody here tonight, but if it happens to you for whatever reason, like you get booted out or you have a disconnect, don't forget, you can watch the video from that week's class anytime after 7 p.m. on that Friday of that week, labeled whatever week it is that you want to watch. And of course, you may want to see it again a second time or parts of it if you didn't get all the notes you want, or just to refresh yourself, or for studying for the midterm. So YouTube has the first week's worth of this class already under Mark Wilson's SRJC art history lectures, and then just look up the class, and you'll see all the different weeks worth of videos and the date and everything. So it should be obvious and easy to find. Okay, let us get started now. You should have paper and pen, and you should have the 9 elements of composition in front of you. I'm going to take a quick little bit of a swig just to keep my throat limber, because I'm going to be doing a lot of talking and answering questions. I assume you'll have questions as we go. So I'm going to do this segue to where I might be able to pull this closer. I think I can to get the image. Yeah, I can to get it larger. But I need enough room to maneuver when I point to I have a pointer. Yes, that's one of those kind of lectures. Yeah, there we go. Okay. And I will stand out of the camera range unless I accidentally don't and forget, and you could just holler if I do that. Okay, there's no set order, by the way. Yeah, no, this is a funny pose to have, but just to get started, there's no set order you have to follow into, as to, how you want to use those 9, or write, analyze is the word, analyze the 9 elements. You can follow, the easiest way is to follow the handout. They're listed 1 through 9. I varied the order a little bit just for variety's sake, for me not to get, stale when I give the same lecture every semester for 20 plus years. So it isn't anything that should confuse any of you, because all 9 are on the board. We're covering them all just in a slightly different order, okay? All right, so let's start with this one. I think it's the easiest one to analyze, okay? Balance, and I'm gonna pull this a little closer even. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, so you can see the top line pretty clearly. The 9 elements of composition, the other way to say it, in your papers, you should label, when you're doing this analysis in 2 papers, you should write formal analysis. That way, either me or the readers, when we're grading it, know that that's our cue, that you're gonna come up, hopefully, with all 9 elements and analyze them all. Okay, let's start with I think one of the easiest, balance. Okay, so you see, follow along on here because it's number 2 on this list. I gave you the definition of each of these elements on the handout, of course. But you may want to write extra notes on the margin or on another piece of paper. Number 2 on this list, number 1 up on the board, is balance is when you look at a work of art and ask yourself, I'm not going to keep saying that because that's obviously what you're doing is thinking about these things. So when you look at a work of art, ask yourself, are there equal or roughly equal areas of objects from the top to the bottom and from the left to the right in a work of art? Well, the best way I can think of to illustrate it is this, and Dr. Gill's book covers each of these elements in more detail than we have time for, by the way. That's one reason to have that as an assigned text, because in her book, she goes into more examples than I can cover in this single half of a lecture, right? So I'm just going to give you 1 or 2 examples of each one. So for balance, how can you analyze whether a work of art is visual? We're talking about visual balance, of course, in the arrangement of the various objects in that painting or sculpture or even parts of the building. All visual works of art can be analyzed this way, whether they are or not balanced. And you need to do a couple of steps to do that. First, in your mind, obviously not literally, but in your mind, you create a border, you can call it a frame around that work of art, right? Square, rectangle, whatever shape it needs to be, around the outer edges of that painting, sculpture, or building in your mind. Of course, if you're working on a painting, most of you are going to write about at least one painting. Your job's done there because the paintings are all in frames. Every painting I've ever seen has a frame. So then it's already done. So you have an imaginary grid is what you're aiming for. Divide that frame, around it into 4 equal parts. They're called quadrants. This is not, rocket scientists. You all, I'm sure, can follow me here. It's pretty straightforward. These are 4 equal segments or quadrants. So now you have a system, a reliable way to analyze, is this work of art balance? So let's take a painting. I'm just, being kind of simplistic here. Let's say they're jellyfish, okay? It may not look like that to you, but just let's call these jellyfish. So you have a painting of jellyfish and you ask yourself, okay, now I'm looking in each quadrant. Are there equal numbers of these objects, these jellyfish, in each of the 4 quadrants? In other words, left to right first is easiest to do it that way, from left to right, since that's how we read, right? And look at things, most people do. So left to right, let's see. Well, How many are there on this side? 3, right, on the left side, and 2 on the right. So is this work of art balanced? Somebody must have some.
No, it is.
Yeah, no,
it
yeah,
is not
exactly.
balanced.
You guys are all, I think, already getting the idea. No, and here's how you would write that. So you may want to jot this down or just remember it when you're ready to write your papers. You would say, this work of art is not, or this is called a painting. This painting is not balanced because it is weighted toward, you can say weighted or unbalanced, either phrase we'll use, weighted or unbalanced toward the left. Because you have to explain why. If you want an A, you have to explain. You don't just say it is or isn't unbalanced. You get maybe at most a minimum passing grade for that. To analyze something, you give me examples. 2 examples is usually plenty for each of these 9 elements. So I'm going to give you 2 examples now. So the first one you would say, if it's this way, if this is the work you're analyzing, you'd say this is unbalanced, this painting, towards the left because there are 3 jellyfish. Or you could just say more, but this is pretty simple. So I just say 3 jellyfish on the left and only 2 on the right. Now, let's take a look at another possible, situation here. Oh, top to bottom. No, before I'm almost jumping too far ahead. Look at top to bottom. Is it balanced top to bottom? Are there the same number of objects above the middle line? Again, pretty obvious?
No.
Right. Yeah, of course. You get the idea. So again, how would you write that? You'd say this, again, painting is unbalanced toward the bottom. The weighted or unbalanced toward the bottom because there are more jellyfish, or 3 if you want to get specific, jellyfish on the bottom half and only 2 on the top. But let's see what would happen if we did this. Okay, I have to hold this because it wobbles. My daughter's thinking it's been crashing to the ground here, but hopefully it won't. So if you have this, okay, now can you see how that alters it? You know, I mean, we want to keep moving, so I'll just go ahead and mention it. You guys get the idea, I think. Now you would say it's balanced top to bottom. Why? Because there's an equal number, 3, obviously, jellyfish above and below the middle. But it's unbalanced, even more so, right? Or heavily weighted, you could say, towards the left, because there's 4 of these jellyfish on the left and 2 on the right. So to make it balanced, of course, how would you do that? Pretty straightforward. You would make, or if you're looking at something like this, and if it were the actual painting that you had to analyze, if it was like that, it would be completely balanced because there's an equal number of objects, or in this case, jellyfish, on the left and the right, and from the top to the bottom. That's how you'd write about it, okay? So I'm going to pause after each of these descriptions and see, are there any questions about balance? I think it's pretty straightforward. This is one of the easiest, I think, things. I'd start with it, or either that or the next one, number 2. Okay?
So if someone uses balance in their painting, is that meant to emphasize a particular quadrant of the painting?
If it's unbalanced, that would be the reason, yeah. Unbalanced would mean they want you to notice the objects. There are more objects, they're heavier, weighted more in a certain section, or either half or one of the quadrants. The usual reason for it is the artist is intending you to notice those objects first, or pay more attention to them. Yeah. Okay, good question. Any others? All right, stable versus dynamic. We kind of covered that with the slide of Michelangelo's Libyan Sibyl, but I'm going to restate the definition and give you a couple examples verbally. Now, I didn't draw it because there's only so much room here and I don't really need to do that. I think it'll be obvious, but here we go. So on this list on your handout, it's number 1, obviously. Number 1, dynamic versus stable. That's when you look to see, right? You're looking at a work of art and you look for the presence of 2 or more diagonal and or curved lines make something dynamic. Again, the presence of 2 or more diagonal and or curved lines would make that work of art, or at least that part of that work, that painting or sculpture or building, a dynamic work of art. Whereas the opposite is true for stable. That is, the use of straight lines or right angles makes something stable. I think we covered that pretty well last week, but I don't want to assume anything, and that's what we're all here for, is to clarify each of these before we finish up tonight, so you can start seeing for yourself how they apply to each work of art that's in this class during the lectures and also your papers. Okay, so in other words, it's probably obvious, but if it isn't, you might want to make a note of this. Most works of art have some sections that are stable and some that are dynamic. It depends on the style of the art, the subject of the artwork, or the artist's preference. And most group scenes, that is, portraits of well, even of one person, but certainly when there's groups of people gathering in a painting, a drawing, a photo, or a piece of sculpture, by definition, there's going to be some movement. The bodies of the human, at least some of the figures, the human figures, are going to have motion, and therefore they're not going to be stiff, straight, ramrod, right angles, like you do when you're at tension in an army training camp or something, right? So most group portraits have some dynamic elements. That means look carefully at the different figures and see it. Some of them have curved or diagonal lines in the poses that they are shown in, right? It's a pretty straightforward concept, I think. And dynamic is not only limited to paintings or two-dimensional works of art. Architecture can be stable or dynamic. And of course, most buildings have at least a little bit of dynamic detail, but it depends on the style. We're going to cover a couple of periods of architecture in this class. So when you get to late 20th century, and certainly, current modern architecture, people like Frank Gehry, some of you know, right, who he is. You rarely see any straight lines in their buildings. And Frank Lloyd Wright was one of the first to break that normal taboo of most buildings have straight lines, and most of the exterior is stable. Therefore, maybe only the roof line is diagonal or dynamic. So works of art, all visual works of art can have this analysis applied, whether there are sections of them, whether it's a building or sculpture or painting, a drawing, or a photo. And look carefully, you'll usually see an example of at least some dynamic and some stable sections or elements within each work of art. There are exceptions where everything is totally dynamic or totally stable, but those are unusual. So you need to give me one example of each. If you see one, easily one section of a drawing, painting, whatever, that's dynamic, and one that's stable, or more than one of each, just give me at least one example for each of those. So the rule of thumb, I'll say it again, and I'll repeat it more than once, in your papers, if you want an A, is to give me at least 2 examples of where you see very specifically each of these elements. Okay, any questions on number 2? All right, rhythm. This is also pretty straightforward, but I will give you several examples, and these aren't on the handout, so you may want to write these down. Rhythm, which is number 3 on both the board and my printout. Rhythm is the presence of 2 or more repeated or similar shapes that creates rhythm. We're talking about visual rhythm, not, musical rhythm, of course. So here are some examples of where every time you see this kind of, a certain kind, of painting or drawing, there will be rhythm. The human body, even if it just from the neck up, right? Just a painting of someone's face, which there are a lot of those, and we'll see several in this semester, a portrait of a person. Even if it's just their face and neck, that's a bust, right? If it's a piece of sculpture, it's called a bust. That's still going to have rhythm. Why? Because, of course, at least most people would have 2 eyes, 2 ears, 2 lips, and maybe even, bangs or some hair that comes down over their forehead or down over their neck. And of course, if it's a full-length portrait, usually, again, for most portraits, there'll be 2 arms, 2 hands, 2 legs, 2 feet. You get the idea. So a portrait of a person, no matter how close up or far away, by definition has rhythm, always, always. And you just need to say that, where, are there, what do you see in this painting? 2 eyes, 2 lips. I started to say 2 noses. In Picasso paintings, you do see 2 noses, right? Sometimes. But in most realistic ones, you obviously can find 2 or more of the same individual details. You're going to see some of that with both sculpture and, of course, painting. But you also do in architecture, of course. Now, what other kinds of works of art can have a lot of rhythm and always will? A landscape. I've never seen a landscape that had only one object, one tree, one road, one boulder, one house, one mountain in the background. They almost always have multiple objects, trees, bushes, hills, mountains, or even houses or whatever, if it's showing a country road. So that's a pretty guaranteed given that any landscape will have rhythm or multiple objects that are similar. They don't have to be exactly the same to qualify as rhythm. It just needs to be similar, very similar shapes. Like, if it's a village, a scene of a village, not every house is going to be identical, but if they're all one story, and they have peaked roof, right? Gables, those are called, like older houses did in Europe a lot and back east. Then you could say, well, there are repeated shapes of similar houses throughout this painting, drawing, photo, whatever it is. Therefore, it has lots of rhythm. I think that's pretty explanatory. Of course, group scenes always have portraits, no matter the fact that it may have a lot of smaller figures or even dead. If it's a battle scene, some people lying on the ground, and some people, running or fighting with each other. Or if it's any kind of crowd scene, just keep it simple, is going to have rhythm because, again, most human bodies have a similar overall shape in that, a head, shoulders, a torso, right, arms and legs. So that's a given. Group portraits, individual portraits, and landscapes, whether they're city scenes or country scenes, are all going to have rhythm, and almost all buildings do. The exception would be the most, my former architecture professor at Cal State East Bay used to call lunkhead buildings, where it's just a cube, a box, or a rectangle. You're not likely to want to write a paper about a boring building like that. So almost every piece of architecture has multiple shapes. There's nothing else, the windows and the doors. That creates rhythm. Okay, I think these first three I start with the simplest and easiest. They're pretty self-explanatory. Any questions about rhythm? All right, line, I will do my first little Mickey Mouse artwork here for you. Number 4 on this board. Line can be used as either outlines, and I will now point to that part of this text that I've already written here, as outlines. And if it's line is used, and it certainly is, this is true for a lot of paintings. The majority of Renaissance art that we're going to see over the next few weeks had this, where there's some objects that have a bold outline, because the artist wants you to notice them more and have them stand out from the background, an important person, a king, or whatever. And then maybe the people behind them or objects in the background have a thin outline. So I drew a slightly different, I hope you can see that, examples of thin and bold outline. But line can also be used in 2 other ways. Shading, and I'm going to have to, once again, of course, hold this down here. Shading is when an artist, I'll move out of the way in just a second, uses what's called cross-hatching, lines overlapping each other to create some kind of a sense of shadows or shading. And so that would be an example of line being used as shading as opposed to, well, let me try this. I have a new, that isn't quite as dark as I like. So let me try one other. I bought a couple just tonight. In fact, right before class, a couple of other new, but they have a different sharpness. So let's see if this works better for shading. Okay, which, some of you have done this. I know a lot of you have talents, and I haven't seen too many original works of art, but don't forget, if you, a couple of people here, I don't know if Luis, for instance, if you're, I saw your mini bio, if you have like skills of any kind of visual arts, and you can send me either a PDF or a screenshot of, those drawings or paintings or sculpture or whatever, work of art you've created, you get 5 points each time you do that, up to 4 times. So keep that in mind. That's an easy way to get extra credit. Okay, I think you get the idea. Yeah, that's about as good as it could get. Okay, so there's shading. There you go. Line is used in many places, especially line drawings, like engravings, and we'll see some of those from the Renaissance in this class. Okay, what's the third way line can be used? Carved line, which is in sculptures, of course. But what about architecture? Well, it depends on the building. As some of you already have noticed, some buildings have the name of the building carved. Someone just like with a you know, a chisel like a sculptor would do. The name of the building, and of course now we're having a controversy over whether taking certain people's names off buildings, you know, and so forth. Well, anyway, you know, obviously it's part of every generation's rite of passage is how I like to look at it. We had those issues when I was in college too at UC Berkeley. Not much happened then, but a lot of things are now changing. So carved line in a building would be usually the name of the building or the person it's named after, of course, is usually right above the entrance. But that's not typical of most modern buildings. So what are the other ways line can be used in a building? Really is only one other. It's called visual. Now this you'd need to write because I didn't put it on the handout or the board. Visual line is just the impression of a line at the corners or edges of a building or the framings of the doors and windows. I'll say it again. Visual line in architecture, all architecture has visual line, unless it's just a giant round ball, which there are such buildings. I've seen a few, but that's not common. So any building with corners or right angles is going to have visual line at the edges because the sun is shining at one side or the other when you see the picture or photo of it that you are writing about, or you took that photo. There will be visual lines on the edges of almost every building, as well as visual line, again, around the edges of the doors and windows. So buildings do have a kind of line, but it's not drawn or carved. Okay, so now we're all the way through, almost halfway through. Does anybody have any questions about line number 4? All right,
Could you repeat what visual line is just one more time?
Sure. Visual line? Is that what you're asking? I didn't quite hear the first part of the question. Say it again, please.
Oh, I just was wondering if you could repeat what visual line is one
more
time.
Sure. So it's the impression. Sure, absolutely. Everybody should make sure you write this now because it's not on your handouts. That visual line is when you look at a building, and it's always you know, something you're going to see on just architecture. So in architecture or buildings, visual line is when you look at the edges or corners of the building itself or the framing around the doors and windows, and because of the shadows from the sunlight, right? That gives the impression of a sharp edge, you could say, but the right word is visual line. It gives the impression of there being lines. Even though there's no carved or drawn line to create the corner, it has a visual effect. So again, it's always that pretty straightforward that there's only 2 places a building will have visual lines. At the corners, wherever those are, or anywhere around the outside of a building. We're talking about the exteriors now, just the exteriors. Or usually both, of course, around the edges of all the doors and windows. So that's what visual line is. And it's limited to architecture only. Okay. All right, number 5, masses. This one's pretty straightforward too, I think. And yet it's one that people miss more often on their first paper if they don't analyze it at all, or they skip over it or do it too brief a job. It's an easy one to analyze. So it's number 6 on your handout. So I'll just read that definition. A mass or volume. How do we analyze that? That's when you ask yourself, what are the largest objects or parts in a work of art? Identify, all I ask you to do is identify the 3 largest sections or masses in a work of art for your papers. So for instance, in a painting, if there's like an important person in the foreground, the main person in the painting, a king or a queen or whatever, or if it's about Jesus, you know, you're going to see some of that with the Renaissance, of course, because the religious subjects are popular in Renaissance painting. Then usually that person is the largest object in the painting. Not always, but usually it is. And so that would make that largest mass is whatever the name of the person is that's shown larger than the others, or, you know, closer to us, it looks larger. And then you would say the second and third largest mass, and you will have flexibility on this. I want to make sure you understand. I'm not going to try and get you to agree with everything the way I see it. If you think of something in a painting or a sculpture or drawing as the largest mass, and I don't think it's that, I think it's a different object, you'll still get credit as long as you identify the 3 largest sections or masses in a painting, a drawing, or what about sculpture? If it's a single human being, there's only one mass, right? Unless there are other objects around them. We're going to see some of that when we see statues of David. There's 3 of them in the syllabus. You may notice if you looked ahead. 3 Davids. Why? Because they're all by masters. One is a Michelangelo David, another is an earlier Renaissance artist, right? And then we had from Bernini from the 1600s. So each one of those is a figure of a nude or nearly nude human, right, body, but there are objects on the ground around them. So then you could still say that the largest mass is the figure of David, right, if it's one of those types of sculptures. And then at the second largest is his armor or his shield or whatever it is, the tree stump at the bottom. And then maybe that's it. Maybe there's only 2 objects. So I give you, the point is I want you to just, stress out too much about the various analyses of masses as in terms of what you think of the largest mass. I accept that as long as you explain yourself and give us in the papers, me or the readers, the 3 largest masses. And that's true for sculpture, painting, and drawing, or photography for that matter. What about buildings though? Well, there's something different. So I'm going to go ahead and do another drawing, which I didn't expect to do. And I don't think I can do it down here because the board will wobble too much. So I'm going to do it up here. This is going to seem pretty, talk about Mickey Mouse. This will definitely be Mickey Mouse. But I think you'll see why I'm doing this. Anybody here who has seen any of the King Kong movies? And I know it makes me really old school, but I'm sorry, the best version of King Kong is still the first, 1933, black and white. No one's done better, but there have been plenty of color versions, and even a new one called Kong Island, right? Where he's a character with a little different storyline. Anyway, let's just assume that most of you have seen those movies, or if you haven't, just follow me here. This is my rather poor rendition of the Empire State Building as it appears at the end of those movies, where King Kong, as you know, climbs up it to try and get away from the airplanes. Okay, so let's say this is what you're writing about. Of course, you're not going to write about movies in this class, but maybe there's some visual work of art that's an image from one of those movies. So we'll put old King Kong up here. It's terrible. I know, it's like he's already falling, right? The planes have already gotten to him. But this would be an example of 3 types or 3 areas, sections, if you want to call it that, of a building. The Empire State Building is 102 stories tall. And the 3 main sections are, in order of size, the shaft. I'm going to go ahead and mark it off with these lines here. I hope you can all see this, right? I'm going to step out of the way. That would be the largest mass. It's 80 stories. The base, or the first part of the building, is only 20 stories, or it's about, might be 18, but anyway, it's about that. So that would be the second largest mass. And then the smallest mass is the spire, from which poor King Kong tried to cling to life at the end of all those movies. So that's how you'd write about this. If you write about the Empire State Building, some of you may, because I've had good papers about it. It's a very interesting building for a lot of reasons, of course. So you could say, by the way, it's not the first building that was over 1,000 feet tall. I used to think that was the Chrysler Building, which beat them by about 6 months. The 2 architects were in competition with each other. Those were the first 2 buildings in the world that were over 1,000 feet. Both, of course, in Manhattan and New York City. Okay, so you'd say the largest mass in the Empire State Building is the shaft because it's 80 stories tall. The second largest is the base, which is whatever it is, 18 or 20 stories. And then the smallest is the spire because it's not as tall as the rest and it's thinner. Okay, so you can apply mass to all visual works of art, and you just use your powers of interpretation or observation to decide which you think are the 3 largest masses. Okay, any questions about number 5, masses? All right, textures. This is a little more complex, but not that much more so. The definition, as I put it, was number 5 on the handouts. Our textures is when an artist uses, I'll say this, repeat it, say it slowly, repeat it once. Line or lines, colors, and shading. An artist uses lines, colors, and shading to create the illusion of real textures or what we call simulated, and I wrote it out here. Remember that it's not with a T. It didn't have too much caffeine. It's SI, not STI. I've had people write stimulated textures. No, they aren't stimulated. They are simulated, imitation of real textures. So they're trying to create the illusion of real texture in a painting or a drawing by using these elements of line, color, and shading. And of course, if it's a Renaissance or any other realistic style of painting, most of the works in this class, the paintings, are going to be realistic images, trying to look like real life. Then they're going to be simulated textures, and you are, if you want an A, required to say, do you see sharp, simulated, or you could say realistic if you prefer that, or even strong, any one of those three words. But I chose to keep it simple and just write sharp, simulated textures are what all Renaissance and other realistic style painting uses. On, the skin, you have to say where, of course. Give me at least two examples. On this portrait of Henry VIII, let's say, the simulated textures are very sharp and realistic on his beard and his jacket or something like that, or his skin. If they're not sharp, like in an Impressionist painting, we are covering that, of course, in this class, then that would be diffused or soft. You could say it either way, soft or diffused. I should probably write soft or diffused on there, because you can see the difference when you look at an Impressionist painting. It's not sharp and realistic. It's not supposed to be. Because Impressionism is all about, softer, diffused, right? Use of textures. There's some implied, right, some hint of realistic textures, but they're not sharp or strong deliberately. So in a painting that is an Impressionist or anything more modern later, is with, well, not anything, but many other more modern paintings after Impressionism did not try to create realistic or sharp simulated textures. They use soft or diffused. Now, what about a building? Well, let's talk about sculpture, because this is, you might want to write this. David, the statue, and could cover it next week. Michelangelo's statue, the largest human figure ever carved, ever in the history of the human race. There's no arguing with this. It was the largest figure ever carved out of a human figure, out of a single piece of stone. 19 feet tall. No one else could do anything with it. It was too big. But the genius, he obviously was, but Michelangelo figured out how to create this 16.5-foot tall human statue, of course. And it's, if you've been to Italy, some of you have, right? You've seen it, or even just, photos of it, it's a completely amazing, realistic example of a human figure with simulated textures on the hair, the fingernails, the toenails, the eyes and ears, the face, right? So simulated textures can apply to both paintings and drawings, two-dimensional works, or to sculpture. But wait, this is part of what's different about sculpture from painting. When it comes to textures, easily identifiable material, such as that statue of David, you can all visualize, I think everyone can in your mind, it's made out of white marble. And so, of course, that is a real smooth texture. So you would need to say, if you want an A, you'd need to say that. You need to say there are simulated textures on the realistic and strong or sharp ones, where Michelangelo carved on the face and on the fingernails and the muscles, whatever. But it also, the sculpture, second sentence, right, is also made out of the real smooth texture of marble, because you can see that. Now, some works of art, you can't quite tell what the material is, but you can see if it's smooth or rough. Those are the other types of descriptions of real textures in a sculpture. Usually sculpture has both real and simulated textures. What about buildings? Almost all buildings have only real textures. That would mean that they are, made out of whatever stone, brick. Brick is rough always, right? Every kind of brick you can find. Some stone, if it's a marble front of a building, many buildings have marble on them, certainly in the ancient world, but even more modern ones, banks and things, then that's a real smooth texture of marble. Or if it's metal, as most skyscrapers now are, metal and glass, well, those are two real smooth textures. I did this with the last slide last week, I think. No, it wasn't. We didn't. Oh, yeah, in the introduction. Yeah, we briefly talked about it. With the yeah, the Frank Lloyd Wright building. Yes, remember the Guggenheim Museum in New York? And if you didn't see that part of the lecture, you can watch it on YouTube. Because that building has only real smooth textures, like many modern buildings from the 20th century or later, which would be real smooth glass, real smooth concrete, and real smooth metal for the frames of the windows. Okay, I think that's pretty much all I need to say on textures. Any questions? Okay, then we move to modeling. And when I say modeling, of course, I'm talking about the technique, not the career. Okay, so what is this? Well, I drew, let's say, a large stone ball. You might say, oh, what? That was common as a garden decoration in the Renaissance, and I've seen it in many gardens today, where they're imitating Italian Renaissance style gardening or any other kind of, classical gardening, landscaping in a garden. So let's say you had a giant, painting of a giant ball. I'm trying to get out of the way here of stone, and the light is hitting it from where I put the arrow, from the lower right, in this painting or drawing. It could be either a drawing or painting. What is modeling? How does it apply to that kind of image in a work of art? Well, if it's a realistic, right, painting or drawing, then the artist is going to use, again, it's cross-hatching. We saw it earlier. I'm going to do some more of it here to make this look even, I hope, more three-dimensional, right? Overlapping lines to create the illusion of shadows. Why do they do that? So the objects will look, like, have the illusion of being three-dimensional. I'll read you that definition again. Here it's the last one on the list, modeling, number 9 on the handout. Modeling, the use of contrasting areas of light and dark or shading to create the illusion of a three-dimensional object. This may not do as good a job as some of you can do, but you get the idea, the attempt at least, of trying to make, the shadows just follow along where the sunlight would hit it. And then on the side where the sun doesn't penetrate, you have shadows. And that at least is an attempt. If it's well done, it's convincingly a way of making an object look three-dimensional in a painting or a drawing. Modeling in a building or sculpture is just the shadows from the sun. There's no technique for modeling. But that's all you'd have to say. When it comes to architecture, there's no technique for modeling. It's just the different shadows that the sun creates, and the same with sculpture. Okay, again, you need to say, is the modeling sharp or soft? Don't forget that with later styles, and we're going to get to those after the midterm when we get to the 1800s and the 19th and 20th century, right? You'll see, even before Impressionism, some of the romantic painters from the turn of the 1800s were doing soft, or you can say diffused, either word it will do, simulated textures. Then you need to say that and give me 2 examples of where you see those softer, diffused modeling. As I've said, modeling. I apologize, because modeling, of course, can help with the process of making something look like it's got simulated textures. But modeling is its own technique, where it's just the concept of whether there are shadows contrasting with light areas in any part of a painting or drawing, or it could be a photo. Photos can also have modeling, of course. That would be light creating the shadows on the opposite side of a person's face or a room or whatever. So modeling is usually going to be 1 or 2 things: sharp and realistic, or soft and diffused. I think that's pretty explanatory, but again, I don't want to just, assume everyone's clear. Any questions about modeling? It's a technique. Okay, now we get to the 2 most complex, and you're going to see more of my Mickey Mouse artwork. And before we get to that, you're going to get to see my wife's color wheel. She's a painter with some skill, unlike myself. And now my daughter's trying to learn those techniques for her art class in her senior year of high school. I never did learn how to paint. I tried to learn how to draw. You can see it was rather a mediocre effort, but at least this will work enough to get the ideas of these techniques. Okay, we're second from the end here on color. Color is a complex concept, but it can be broken down into 3 main types of colors that artists use. Okay, so here at number 8 on the handout, is the same as it is on the board, the numbering of it. Okay, so here we have, with color, you look to see the use of warm colors or earth tones, which I've listed them here. The main ones: red, yellow, orange, gold, brown, and pink, or any kinds of combinations or shadings of those, types of colors. Again, those are tones that come from, or colors that come from natural things on or in the earth. Red, yellow, orange, gold, brown, and pink. Those are listed for you. Or they can use contrasting to warm tones. An artist might use cool tones, and there are really only 4 main ones. I've listed them as well on this handout, and those are blue, green, gray, and white. Why would an artist use one or both, warm or cool tones, in a work of art? Because warm tones appear to advance toward the viewer, and cool tones appear to recede from the viewer. It's how human beings, when you do have if you have full color vision, you see these kind of colors in that subconsciously, in that order, that you'll notice, even if you don't think about it consciously, subconsciously or consciously, you'll notice that the warm colors are something you notice first. And then if they have a contrasting background, usually it's in the background, of cool colors, then you notice those after the warm colors, okay? Because cool tones appear to recede from the viewer. And then finally, black and white, if all there is black and white, like for instance, this whole board, there are no warm colors here. And so black and white together, or shades of gray with black and white, that's neither cool nor warm. Those are considered neutral. So this is all neutral here because there's no warm and cool colors contrasting with each other in this particular set of poorly done drawings. Finally, all human skin tones are considered warm. There's no need to explain that. I mean, that's all human skin tones are considered warm. So let's take a look at, now I'm going to try and hold this up at just the right angle, because it can get hard to read, but last week I was able to show it pretty well, I think. This is a, yeah, I knew that would happen. Let me sit down because I think I can do this better. Seated. This is a print of a magazine almost exactly, well, just over 100 years ago, which is something we have on our wall in my house. Now, of course, the reflection. See, if I turn this off, you're not going to be able to, now, oh, that's a reflection just of this, yeah. Okay, there we do. If I put it at that angle, you can see it. It was a magazine called House and Garden. I think it's still around. By the way, if you're curious, you can't read it, I'm sure, but it's, I think it's July 1919, right smack dab in the middle of the worst pandemic we've ever had until now. The famous Spanish flu, which was not correctly named. It didn't start in Spain. But anyway, it was called the Spanish flu. It killed 700,000 Americans, 750,000, some people think. And we didn't have even 110 million. That was when we had less than a third of our population. Hopefully we don't get anywhere near that with this one. Anyway, so this is from, over 100 years ago. Why is it? There we go. There, that's better. But you can see that the house shows up first. The house is warm, entirely warm colors, and it's not an accident. The roof is red and the walls are a mixture of kind of a tannish color around the windows and a light yellow on the gable there, right? And then the door again is red. But the background is shades of green and blue in the sky, green trees and grass, and then white picket fence. How stereotypical can you get? But anyway, the proverbial white picket fence. Anyway, the point is the artist deliberately chose for this magazine to paint the house, which you're supposed to focus on and notice first, in warm colors, specifically, shades of brown, tan or brownish, or, clearly earth tones, and red and yellow. So you notice the house first, and then you notice the sky and the trees and the grass afterwards, because those are cool colors. Okay, and then the only other thing is, this is my wife's, she uses it for some of her paints. Some of you have done this, I'm sure. A color wheel. Okay, why am I even showing you this when, isn't it self-evident? No, it isn't if you haven't taken color theory or painting. Again, this is doing this kind of thing. Here we go. Let's see. I think you can see it if I'm gonna have to hold it at an angle. There we go. So what you see are the warm colors are in this section here, right? Right, but then what happens when we get to the purple? Is purple warm or cool? Well, that's where you have your own discretion. I give you flexibility. I always do that in all my classes because there's no absolute right or wrong, because purple can have some shades of purple will have more blue in them than red. Well, then to me, that makes that a cool shade or cool version of purple. But in some purple types of purple colors, right? As you know, from various jackets and coats and shirts that people can buy that, might have a very reddish purple color, or cars, for instance. It's a very popular color for new cars, I've noticed. The more warmish reddish tones of purple would make that a kind of warm version of purple. The same is true for some shades of green. If you were to look at this shade here, I would certainly call that a cool shade because it's closer to the blue next to it, right? But if you move over to this one, sorry, there you go. It's clearly got more yellow. This shade of green has more yellow in it than the one next to it, more yellow than blue. So that would be, I would think, a warm shade of green. I'm not gonna take points off if you don't agree with exactly how I see it. Just explain what you think about, why you think something is more warm or cool. Every work of art we're going to see in the first half of this semester is going to have a mixture of warm and cool shades. It's just almost a given, because of course objects, some of them just by nature are, from nature even, are going to definitely have earth tones in them because they have materials that come from the earth, or the artist is depicting them that way. Okay, let me leave that alone. That end looks disjointed. I'll just leave it. Okay, because we're getting to the last and most complex concept and the most important, and the one where people will need to take more time to get an A. You definitely need to not just gloss over space, the final technique. Okay, there are 6 techniques that artists can use that we cover. There are more techniques in the history of art. And when we get to Chinese landscape painting, I'll tell you what some of those are that they use that were different. But for most works of art that you're going to analyze, and certainly the whole first half of this class, and again toward the end, when we get back to European and American painting and architecture, these are the techniques, these 6, I'm going to define each one, that the artists will use, some combination of them. So let's start with the simplest technique ever invented to depict space in a 2-dimensional work of art. I don't think I even need to explain what it is, but I will briefly. Overlapping. Well, that's when you have 2 or more objects, and the one object that overlaps everything around it is supposed to look closer to us or to the viewer. And those objects that are being overlapped are supposed to be further away from us or further away from the viewer. I don't think that needs explaining. It's pretty self-evident when you see it. Overlapping is the oldest technique ever used in the history of art. Even old prehistoric cave paintings used overlapping. Okay, now we get to register line. This is a technique you're not likely to see, not in the rest of the syllabus, but you might choose to write about a work of art from the ancient world, like Egyptian tomb paintings that often use this technique. What is register line? It's when an artist, now I'm going to say these slowly because some of them are written out and some aren't, but register line, as I recall, yeah, I didn't write the definition. So I'll say it slowly and repeat it if you want to write it. The register line is a technique, of course, for depicting space in a 2-dimensional work of art. I'm going to keep repeating that. That's obviously the precursor to all these definitions. So register line is a technique in which the artist draws 2 or more horizontal lines, right? 2 or more horizontal lines onto the composition, comma, and those objects on the lowest line are closer to the viewer, while those objects on the upper lines are further away. Okay, anybody need me to repeat that?
Could you repeat that?
Sure. It's when an artist draws two or more horizontal lines onto the surface of that work of art, comma, okay. And those objects on the lowest line, because it could be more than one thing, are closer to the viewer. You could say meant to look closer, but that's obviously what the artist is trying to do. So supposed to look closer to the viewer, while those objects on the upper lines are meant to be further away. It's a very simplistic technique. It doesn't really mimic reality or how humans see space, but it does get across the concept of people being, or objects, usually it's human beings, being further and further away. The Egyptians used it a lot, Babylonians to some degree, and I think the ancient Greeks a little bit. The Romans went beyond that. The Romans are more sophisticated than that. Okay, so now we're going to go to the third technique, diminishing size. I hope it's obvious it's two words. I didn't mean to make it run together. Diminishing size is when objects are shown where the largest objects are supposed to look closer and the ones further away look smaller. Again, one of those examples of a technique that is very old. It goes back at least to ancient Greece and Rome. The Egyptians didn't use it. They didn't have that concept. But some of the other ancient cultures did. The point is, it's a way we see things in the distance. Human beings perceive objects that are further away to be smaller, even though they aren't, of course, than they really are. It's just how humans' eyesight works, is just about everybody has, you know, noticed throughout your life, right? So again, diminishing size is when you have two or more objects in a work of art, and the ones that are further away are smaller than the ones that are closest. Or you can say it the other way around. The ones that are closest are larger than the objects further away. That's a pretty straightforward one. Now, for shortening, I decided to use an example from Stonehenge, which of course we aren't covering in this class, but you've all seen, I think most of you anyway, have seen photos of Stonehenge. These giant stones that are 22 feet high, the tallest ones. Amazing, weighing multiple tons. No one knows how they got them there. But anyway, they were arranged in circles, right? Around, you know, concentric circles. So just say if you were looking at a painting or even a photo, painting, a drawing or a photo of, say, Stonehenge, the objects like these giant stones that have fallen onto the ground would be shown in foreshortening. So here's that definition. And again, I'll say it slowly and repeat it at least once. Foreshortening is a technique in which that part of an object closest to the viewer, right, I'm pointing to it, that part of an object that is closest to the viewer appears to be wider, comma, it appears to be wider, and that part of an object furthest away from the viewer, the back end, appears to be narrower, period. This, again, once you think about it, it's pretty straightforward and self-explanatory. It's how, again, human beings perceive objects that are long, right? And when they're, fading into the distance, or they, part of them are further away from us. So any kind of realistic painting, drawing, sculpture, photo is likely to actually use foreshortening if it's done realistically, right? And again, everybody need to repeat that? Foreshortening. Okay. Now we get to the two most sophisticated techniques that you're going to see a lot of in almost every painting covered in this class, except for the abstract paintings. Well, we don't get that far. That's right. We don't go to Picasso. We stop just before that. But there'll be some works of art that you choose to write about that could be abstract, where they don't use either of these techniques. But any realistic painting, drawing, right, or sharp photo is going to have usually a combination of one or both of these two techniques. So let's do atmospheric perspective. I think I wrote the definition down, but I always repeat them. Yes, I did. Yeah. Okay, atmospheric perspective. Yeah, it's on here under number 7. Is where those objects furthest away from the viewer appear bluer and hazier than those objects closest to the viewer. Again, I'll repeat that. Those objects in this technique of atmospheric perspective, it's when an artist depicts those objects furthest away from the viewer as being bluer and hazier than those objects closest to the viewer. This is simply reflecting reality. If you don't know this already, next time you drive across Katati Grade, I don't know if some of you do, right? If you hopefully you don't have to stay locked inside your houses or apartments all the time. Oh, in the daytime. Now this technique applies to daylight. I could say scenes in which there is daylight, but it's obvious. You have to be able to see colors. So obviously in daylight scenes, right? Well, you have to repeat that. Scenes where there's sunlight, whether it's a painting, a sculpture, a photo. I said sculpture, a painting, a drawing, or a photo. If it's a color work of art, you'll notice, like in Katati Grade, when you drive across there, look out towards the Pacific, towards the west. Be careful, don't drive into the lane of the person next to you. I had that happen once when I was experimenting with something. First year I taught at the college. Yeah, that's the only caveat. Be careful if you do this technique, make sure there's no traffic too close to you. But look carefully. It shouldn't take you more than a few seconds, and you'll see the bluish, hazy look of the mountains. The further away they are, the more blue and hazy. It's just the way the atmosphere performs or affects, I guess you say, affects our vision. Again, assuming you have full color vision and it's a sunny day. There's no real debating that, and it's pretty straightforward. So what kinds of works of art use atmospheric perspective? In ancient Egyptian and Babylonians and even most Greeks, no, they didn't know. The Romans perfected it. They didn't invent the technique. We can't really say who did, we don't know. But we know from around early Roman painting all the way up until now, this technique is one of the most popular for depicting space in a two-dimensional work of art. Okay, we're almost done. Scientific perspective. The last and most complex technique that we're going to discuss before we take a break is scientific perspective. It's written here again, the definition, but I'll write it out. That's a technique for depicting a space, and I didn't add this, so you could if you want, invented during the Italian Renaissance. We're going to get right to that right after the break. Invented during the Italian Renaissance, where an artist draws diagonal lines onto a composition that all meet at a common vanishing point on the horizon, in which the artist, this is printed out, so I shouldn't need to repeat it, but here we go. So where an artist draws a series of diagonal lines, there's where the arrow is, onto the composition, which all meet at a common vanishing point on the horizon. The other term for that, some of you may have taken perspective drawing classes, is single point perspective. Again, it's how most people see objects in the distance. So do you see those lines? Almost never. The artist almost always paints over them if it's a painting, or draws over them. And so it's just the way, usually, if an artist wants to do realistic depiction of space, of objects, receding into the distance, they're going to start with this technique if they want to get everything lined up and diminishing. See, it's a combination really of diminishing size with these diagonal points, because these objects, maybe when they're freehand, they don't do it consistently the way human eyesight perceives objects in the distance. But if an artist wants to get it accurately, like we see distance objects going further away from us in space, then they would do this. If they want to be super realistic, they would use this single point perspective, which means they literally draw a series of these diagonal lines. There's a word for that. I used to have to put that on the board, and you were tested on it if you were in my classes 10 years or more. It's too complicated, but I'll tell you, they're called orthogonals. Dr. Gill's book mentioned it. You don't have to know that word for this class. Just diagonal lines is good enough. And they all converge at a vanishing point on the horizon. It's the most realistic technique for depicting space ever invented by human beings. Okay, last thing to say, and then we'll take a break, is what about buildings? Well, buildings aren't techniques for depicting space. A building doesn't depict space. This is very important. I'll sit down and this is going to come up for sure, because you will have at least one question on one slide, at least, and maybe two each, on the midterm and the final that are of architecture. And that's for good reason, because architecture, of course, incorporates almost all the other visual arts in it. Most buildings have some decorative detail and varieties of textures of materials we've covered, and the modeling from the sunlight and the visual lines. But what about when it comes to space in a building? here's what you do for that. And I didn't write this on there, so you should probably write this as the last new line before you take your break, or we take a break, which is that in a building, when you write about space, you describe the largest spaces inside the building and the dimensions of the exterior. In other words, the height of the building or the number of stories. If you don't know the exact height, like the number of feet, just tell me how many stories the building is. And then take, say, the 3 would be good. 3 largest spaces inside. Like, for instance, in most fancy hotels, you have a very large lobby, right? Or you have a ballroom. In the really fancy hotels back in the Midwest, in Chicago, where I grew up, or anywhere on the East Coast, and there are actually plenty of them in San Francisco too, and Southern California, there's going to be some kind of a, multi-purpose entertainment room, which they might not call a ballroom, but, that's what the old word was. So that might be the largest space inside that building. Last week, we saw the Frank Lloyd Wright, remember, museum in New York, the Guggenheim. The largest space was the gallery. It was an open 6-story atrium, in essence, or a gallery with a spiral ramp, and it had a skylight at the top. That's how you describe the space. You don't have to know the exact measurements. If you do, you should put them in your paper or on the exam. But I don't usually give them to you. I don't get that detailed. But just the 3 largest sections or spaces within a building, and at least some description of how large or tall the exterior is. That's how you analyze space, because space in a building is the real space of the different parts of the building. So you only have to give me, the overall exterior description of the, height or number of stories. And then just, again, without exact exact dimensions of how many feet tall each room inside is, but just which are the 3 largest rooms inside. Obviously, with most skyscrapers or multi-story buildings, office buildings, city halls, hotels, there's so many different sizes of rooms. I don't expect you to start describing the different, guest rooms and which has the largest suite. No, just the largest common spaces. And so if I get a paper when this happens a lot, when people say this is a building and so there are no techniques for space, you just dropped a grade because you didn't take the time to analyze what each of the largest spaces were comparatively by describing them briefly, if you know the dimensions, and if not, just in general terms. Okay, any questions on those 6 techniques of space, in particular the last 2? I think we're ready for our break. Okay, so let's see now. We're taking a slightly early break. The good news is that we can probably end, well, I can't be sure. It just depends how many questions. We have 6 slides, which is about average for what we're going to have for each half of, well, actually not necessarily. Some weeks we'll have more, some less. We should be able to end about 5 or 10 minutes early, maybe more, but probably just that, 5 or 10 minutes early time. But don't disappear, because these are things that could be on the midterm, and it's a good chance to apply what you hopefully now have understood from my lecture about space. I mean, about all of the 9 techniques behind me there that I just illustrated. Okay, so let's go ahead and take our break, and let's resume at about 8:06, or yeah, thereabout. This is 15 minutes from now. Okay, here we go. Okay, we're going to go to screen sharing and our first must know slide. Okay, I need to hide the thumbnail. Yeah, there we go. Okay, can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yes, I can hear you.
Thank you. Yeah, okay, so there are now 6 slides that I will give you, of course, the notes you need to take, and any questions, please feel free to ask. We may be able to end a few minutes early, we'll have to see. But of these, every week I'll do this from now on, if I didn't already mention it. That is that I will tell you when a slide is so important that it definitely won't get cut from the study list. Okay. And so there will be anywhere from 2 to 4 out of the 6 or 8 or 10 slides for that week that I'll do that with. This is one of those. This is a very important slide, and you might at first wonder why. I'll explain. Okay, first, since it's on your syllabus, I will only say the title and spell the words once, okay, so we can keep moving. This is the Merode, that's M-E-R-O-D-E, Merode altarpiece, one word, just like it sounds, altarpiece, A-L-T-A-R-P-I-E-C-E. Merode altarpiece. The artist's name is Campin, C-A-M-P-I-N. And the date is 1425. You get a break on the dates. You can just round to a 0 if you prefer that on either, well, not on your papers, you shouldn't, but on the exam. If this slide were on the exam, you could just say 1420s. Okay, why are we looking at this? Well, let's start with the fact that it's early Northern Renaissance. So that leads to the first of the definitions from the other handout. You should always, of course, have next to your laptop or computer, each Zoom class. Okay, so we need to define Renaissance first, right? In order to then define a subcategory or a movement within the Renaissance. These are not super long definitions, but you do need to write them now. You see on the list of terms to know for Art 1.2. Renaissance, okay, that was a revival of ancient classical art and learning in Europe. It should be obvious, but I'll go ahead and say in Europe. The Renaissance was a revival of ancient classical art and learning in Europe, comma, with an emphasis on Christian religious themes. With an emphasis on Christian religious themes, plural. So, are all the paintings we're going to see even tonight necessarily? Certainly not the whole next 3 weeks we're spending on the Renaissance. All religious? I know that could get monotonous. No, there's quite a few works of Renaissance art that are not about religion. And they're usually some of my favorites. But in any case, it's important to mention that. Again, that definition is pretty basic. It could appear on a section of the midterm. I'll explain how definitions might come up on the midterm when we review for the week before the midterm and the final. So again, that's a revival of ancient classical art and learning in Europe with an emphasis on Christian religious themes. Well, that's what this is. This is Renaissance, but it's a certain type of Renaissance, and that's your second definition. Again, not too long. Early Northern Renaissance. Okay, so here we go. That is, right, the period from 1400, you could put a little C, but it means about, right? To say around or about 1400 to 1450 in Northern Europe, comma, that period between 1400 and 1450 in Northern Europe, comma, in which some but not all of the techniques, of the Italian Renaissance were used, period. What does that mean? In a nutshell, the Italians were ahead of the Northern Europeans. The Italians invented the Renaissance. I think most people who've studied art certainly know that. It began in Italy, the Renaissance, and it spread north. So during the first 50 years, in other words, that's the first 50 years of the Renaissance, the Northern painters didn't always get all of the techniques correct that the Italians had just invented. So I'll say it again. It's that period from about or circa 1400 to 1450 in Northern Europe, comma, during which artists, I would say it that way, during which artists used some, but not all the techniques of the Italian Renaissance. So this is early Northern Renaissance. The artist was from what today would be Holland, the Netherlands, Northern Europe, or some people say on the border of Belgium and Holland, just say a Northern European artist was painting a religious scene, a scene from the Bible. So here's the meaning now, right? This is a scene from the Bible painted by an early Northern Renaissance painter. Okay, it depicts the moment, let's get up close now, here we go, in which an angel, there's the angel, was sent by God to tell Mary, she's the one reading, of all things, she's reading the Bible. Now, how could she? The Bible hadn't been written. Well, actually, that's true. The Old Testament was written. So let's say she's reading a book. So I'll say it again. It depicts a scene in the Bible, this painting, in which an angel, God sent an angel, obviously that's the angel with the wings, down to earth to tell Mary that she would give birth to Jesus, his son, right? According to the Bible, right? Jesus was God's son. Pretty important and major moment in the history of the Christian religion, A, and B, in the Bible. It's a very important scene, very popular. It was painted hundreds and hundreds of times during the Renaissance. But this is one of the first paintings in Northern Europe, or early Northern Renaissance style paintings of that scene. So what parts of the accurate, correct, realistic, I would just say realistic details in this painting were borrowed from the Italian Renaissance? Well, most of it. Let's now take a look at the whole thing again. Okay, well, we got one more definition. So I know it's unusual. I don't usually give you 3 definitions right off the bat on the first slide, but tonight we will, because these will come up. You won't have to write them again. They will be from the first week and through in at least the next 2 when we're still in Renaissance art. So here's the last new definition for this slide. And it's, again, fairly short. It's down about 3/5 of the way down your list of terms to know. Triptych, okay? That is a painting with one large central panel, and you can see that, of course, here. A painting with one large central panel and 2 hinged side panels. That's it. That's the whole definition. I'll repeat it. It's a painting with one large central panel and 2 hinged side panels. There are the hinges. You do not need to know anything about the 2 side panels. That's too much detail. And I'll keep it to just the highlights. But now the main part of the notes you should be writing on the meaning or about the central panel. I already told you part of the meaning, right? Which you should have, which is it's a scene from the Bible. There's the angel, there's Mary. She's being told, or the right word is announced by God through the angel, right? That guess what? You're going to give birth to my son, Jesus. And so it's a pretty intense moment. She looks pretty calm, doesn't she, for something, but she hasn't heard the news yet, I guess. Okay, so what is the other part of the meaning you need to write? And that is the symbolism in this painting. For instance, here on the table is a candle. Sorry, there we go. A candle with smoke, right? It's been extinguished. That's with an EX, right? An extinguished candle had meaning in Renaissance paintings. It meant that God's presence was in the room. Somehow, whenever an angel came, it blew out the candles. I guess you don't write that part, but that's in essence what they're saying. Again, an extinguished candle, that would be right here with the smoke coming out of it, is proof of God's, or a sign, a symbol, if you prefer, a symbol of God's presence in the room. He was present through the angel because supposedly he sent the angel. Okay, then we have the flowers. These are white flowers. They're lilies. I'm sorry, we have a dog named Lily at this and that dog ain't as multicolored. But anyway, these white flowers, you can say, or lilies, you can say it either way. They literally are lilies. They are symbolic of Mary's virginity. According to the Bible, she was able to give birth without having involved herself in the, whatever, the business of sex, right? Supposedly she was a virgin even after giving birth. Don't ask me how this is supposed to happen. It's if you're raised, in certain religious, context, you already know this. So just write it if you don't know that. You don't need to, get into detail. Just say it's symbolic. The white flowers or lilies are symbolic of Mary remaining a virgin even after she gave birth, according to the Bible. And then one more symbol here is this pot in the back in that little niche. There's pure liquid in it, like clear water. Just say clear water. So a clear vessel, right? Any vessel, right, holding liquid, that's clear. So just say a clear vessel is another symbol of Mary's virginity. She was called the Virgin Mary in the Catholic Church, of course, and in the Bible too. So those are the main symbols you need to know. You could add this if you want. You don't have to, because you have 3 is enough for now. But you see that little cross? Can some of you see that? I don't think I can get any larger than that. Let me see. The next, I'm going to try this. Whoops, I didn't mean to make that. Let's see. The next one I don't think is, it is bigger. Yeah, but it's not as clear. Let's get a little closer. You might barely be able to see. See, it goes out of focus when you get too big. That's a cross being carried by a Holy Ghost. Again, symbolic of God's spirit being in the room when the angel tells Mary this news. You don't have to write that one, but it is another fact you could put in your notes about the meaning. Okay, so what about this painting is the last thing about the meaning now, and then we'll do a little partial formal analysis. I won't give you all 9 elements on each slide. That's too much for you to write, and more than you need to know for the tests. On your papers, you are expected for an A to write about all 9 elements, but not on the tests, just 6 of them. So I usually give you 5 or 6. Okay, so what have we got here? We've got about the last fact now about the meaning is this painting has a realistic simulated texture. You see that on the clothing and the hair and all the furniture, the wooden bench and the floorboards and the beam ceiling, realistic simulated textures and strong, sharp or strong realistic modeling. Those are techniques that were invented by the Italian Renaissance, definitely. So that's borrowed from the Italians. But what it doesn't get right is the single point or scientific perspective. Look at the table. You don't even have to get too detailed. If this were on the essay part of the exam, you could just say an example of the inaccurate use of space or depth or the lack of scientific perspective, that's a easier way to say it, is the way the table is tilted upward. Oh, but look at it, it's ridiculous. That table should be clattering onto all the objects, on it should be clattering onto the floor. And quite literally, it isn't lined up right with the bench and the wall and the fireplace. All those other objects are at different angles from the table. So the art, in other words, this artist did not know the technique of scientific perspective, which, as I said before the break, was invented by the Italian Renaissance. Okay, that's more than enough on the meaning. If it's on the exam, you only have to give me 6. I'll probably give you like 10 facts about it. Only 6 of those facts would be enough to get an A on if this were on the essay part. And I won't be cutting it for the study list. Okay, so what else can we say about the formal elements? I already described the simulated textures on, the robes of the 2 figures and their hair and clothing. The modeling, I already said that's very sharp and realistic, especially like on the fireplace underneath the hood of the fireplace there, and in the niche, it's a lot of strong, realistic modeling. What about balance? Is this balanced? I would say left to right, roughly. Even though Mary's lower her head, when you add the soot, or what do you want to call it, the shadows in the fireplace to the top of this angel's wings, it's roughly balanced, roughly. The 2 figures are the same size, the 2 living figures. And the table's in the middle, even if it is not depicted correctly. It has a rough balance. If you don't think so, I wouldn't argue with you. If you think this angel looks somehow bigger because the head and the wings are slightly taller than Mary, that's okay. So like I said, I give you guys flexibility on that kind of question. Okay, but top to bottom, it's unbalanced. Clearly, there's more objects below the middle, right? With all the furnishing and the 2 figures mostly lying below the middle line. So it is not balanced top to bottom. It's unbalanced toward the bottom. The colors are warm on Mary's red dress and warm on the brown wooden furniture, right? And the ceiling and floor, cool on the walls and the angel's wings, and warm again on the skin because all skin tones are considered warm. And then we have rhythm. Oh yeah, I mean, there's the angel has 2 wings. There's 2 windows. They're kind of like porthole windows. You can just say 2 round windows. There's 2 candle holders here. This window has shutters. They're the same shape, right? Obviously, human bodies, right? 2 arms, 2 heads. There's lots of rhythm. And is it stable or dynamic? It's both. It's dynamic on the pot or vessel, you can say, on the round windows, the top of the fireplace or hood, and fairly stable on the edges of the furniture, the walls, and so forth. So it's a mixture. Okay, and all the lines are thin in this painting. Let's move on. Okay, any questions before we move on? Here's another view. I've got a closer view, but the colors aren't that.
So wait, were we on the formal analysis?
Yes, we just did it. Yeah, so
can you repeat that one more time?
Not the whole formal analysis. We're running short. Do you have a question about any one element? Because I just did. I did 6 of them. Sorry.
Can you? And what
I'll
were
briefly mention them because we have to keep moving. It's roughly balanced left to right, I would say, but some people, if you prefer it, I would accept it, that think the angel makes it unbalanced because the angel's taller, but that's just because she's sitting and not leaning against it. Okay, and it's unbalanced toward the bottom, obviously, because there's empty space above the two figures. And then we have thin, everything has thin outline. There's no bold outlines on any object here. The colors are warm on Mary and the furniture, right? The table, the floorboards. This isn't the best image, right? There, that is, yeah. So obviously warm on the top and bottom, and the clothing of Mary, cool on her robes. And it is dynamic on the human figures and stable on the walls and the ceiling and the floor. Okay, that's for now. Oh, yeah, and it has rhythm, the repeated arms, you know, heads, right? Hands. There's a lot of rhythm. Okay, now we'll get to the next must know. This is another one that's quite important. Let's see if I can get a better image. Yeah, I can. There we go. These were done for me by Slide Librarian, and she usually used more than one version of each slide. This is the best. Okay, so this is the next must know, and it won't be cut from the study list. This one might be more interesting because it gets kind of controversial at the bottom there. All right, and this is the Ghent, 2 words, altarpiece. Altarpiece, remember, is 1 word, A-L-T-A-R, piece, altarpiece. Ghent, I'll spell that as a city in Belgium, G-H-E-N-T, Ghent, altarpiece. The artist, 2 brothers, I will say their names slowly. Some say Jan, but the way Europeans pronounce it is Jan, J-A-N, the first brother, and Hubert, H-U-B-E-R-T, Van Eyck. Their last names, like lots of Dutch and Belgian people, are 2 words. Their last name is 2 words. V-A-N and second word E-Y-C-K, Van Eyck. I think a lot of you have heard of them. They're the most famous of all Northern Renaissance painters, no question. 1432. So what do we see here? We see a scene from the throne room of heaven. This is the meaning now, right? Okay. What does that mean? It means that it's supposedly what it would be like if you went up to heaven and wanted to visit God, according to, I guess, the Bible, right? In any case, that's God with the red robes and the crown. How do we know? First of all, he's seated higher than the other 2 figures. We'll say who they are in a minute. He's in the middle and he's seated at a higher, right, level than the others. Plus, he's got a crown on. That's God. Supposedly, the most important figure, obviously, in heaven would be God. So there he is in the middle. Who are the other 2 figures? The woman in the blue robes is Mary, who is called in the Bible the Queen of Heaven. She's always shown in a Renaissance painting, at least, on the right-hand side of God. And she has a crown too, which is a hint of her being a queen, right? It's a figurative term. They don't mean literally like a king or queen. Just the most important female in heaven. That's her. Mary, after she died, after Jesus, right? And then she went back up supposedly to join him in heaven. So this is the throne room of heaven with God in the middle, and Mary, mother of Jesus, the Queen of Heaven, on the right hand side of God. And then this guy here is John the Baptist, just like it sounds. John the Baptist was the guy that supposedly converted Jesus to Christianity. So just saying John the Baptist, you don't have to get detailed, who is shown always in every painting that he's in with a long hair, I call it hippie hair, do you call it what you want, long hair and a beard always, and carrying a Bible and wearing an animal skin coat. Don't ask me why, but that's what he's described as in the Bible. So the painters of the Renaissance always showed him with those 3 features. That's how we know it's John the Baptist. Long hair and a beard, an animal skin coat, and a Bible in one hand. Okay, so what's the other part of the meaning? Well, it's what's below. Now, this is where it gets interesting. What's going on down here? Well, it's supposed to be the last judgment. I'm going to keep this brief. Tell you what, why don't you rest? I know it's a lot of writing, so take a break in the writing and just hear me out, and then I'll summarize at the end. The bottom part of this painting, which is not a triptych because it's 4 panels. Remember, a triptych by definition, the word triptych, T-R-I, means 3 parts. This is not. It's too big. It's just an altarpiece. So it has more than 3 sections. The fourth section, the bottom panel, is supposed to show when God comes back down, or Jesus actually. Jesus comes back down to earth to tell people who gets to go to heaven and who has to go to hell. That gets to. Who has to go to hell and who gets to go to heaven. It's called the Last Judgment. Some of you have heard that phrase. This depicts that. But something's a little odd about this. And this is what you might want to write. I'll say it first and then summarize it for you. If you want to, if this were on the exam, you could mention this. I think it's the most interesting thing about this painting. What do we notice about these are the people that all get to go to heaven? Do you see any poor people here? Do you see any homeless? Do you see any handicapped or people, barely able to walk? There were plenty of people that lost limbs in wars and plagues.
Nope, don't see it.
No, they're all rich. Yeah, they're all rich and powerful. Why would this painter, these two brothers, actually do that? Because that's who paid for the painting. It's called patronage. So here's how you can summarize that. In this painting, the scene at the bottom depicts the moment when Jesus comes back to earth to tell everyone who goes to heaven and who goes to hell. But in this version, only rich people are going to heaven. And that's because they paid for the painting. Not everyone in this painting paid, but many of them, probably they all gave some money. It was expensive. These paintings could take a year, and it's a bunch of panels on the front and back. There's like 8 panels. So yeah, it was an expensive painting. And then it had to be mounted in the church. You don't have to write all that. Just say that the cost of this painting, creating the entire painting, was paid for by rich people. So they insisted that they be shown as the ones going to heaven. Now, don't have to write this. That's good enough if you just write that one sentence for the last thing about the meaning. Well, there is one more fact about the meaning. So the only other thing you don't have to write this, but is that is totally contradictory to what Jesus said in the Bible, which is it's easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than a rich man to get into heaven. Sounds like the original socialist, right? I'm not saying that that's what he was. The point is he never said that. There was never any part of the Bible where Jesus said, all the rich people, the powerful people get to go to heaven. Oh yeah, definitely. It's not that none of them would, maybe, but that's not the point of the Bible's quoting Jesus. He never said anything like that. It's just this painting and many, many others, of course, that were commissioned is the word, right? Or paid for. You could just say paid for by rich people. So they showed themselves in these paintings as being the chosen, the holy ones, the saved ones, right? Not exactly what the Bible said, but never mind that detail. Only other thing to say about the meaning. It's early Northern Renaissance because these guys were from Belgium, which I think everybody knows is in Northern Europe, right? But here they mastered scientific perspective. So here's the very last line. Keep it to single sentence of the meaning. I'm going to do a formal analysis on this. These two painters, the two brothers, the Van Eycks, you can just say, to keep it brief, what Jan and Hubert Van Eyck, were the first Northern Renaissance painters to master the technique, or you could just say use the technique of scientific perspective. You can see the diagonal lines here. Let's get up close and you see what I mean. They're on the tiles, on the floor, which reminds me of the Art Deco 1930s tile work on my bathroom when we first moved. We replaced the floor because the tile was all cracked. Anyway, some of you know what I mean. If you've ever lived in an old apartment or house, often the tile work has grouting, yeah, right? Between the tiles. Of course, tile has to have grouting. So just keep it simple and say that this painting is an example of early Northern Renaissance by the first Northern European painters. You can just say Northern painters to master the technique of scientific perspective. So now we are going to do the formal analysis. Okay. First, I just said one thing about space. This has scientific perspective. Those diagonal lines, if you kept drawing them, they would meet past beyond the throne room, right? Beyond God's throne on the horizon. They'd meet somewhere around the middle of his chest. If you just kept drawing them, you'd see what I mean. So just, you don't have to visualize that. You can just say there are diagonal lines actually painted onto the bottom of the canvas, which were used for scientific perspective. So it has scientific perspective. It also has overlapping. These are the space techniques. Remember, I said that's the most complex of all the elements of composition. And you'll need to address, if you want an A, if you chose to write a paper about any of these kind of paintings, or if this were on the midterm, at least say what techniques are and aren't used. Scientific perspective, overlapping. Obviously, the three figures overlap the thrones. Their clothing overlaps their bodies, of course. And it uses, let's see, is there foreshortening? Yeah, I would say there is on the floor, on the tiles. There is. Not much, but there's a little bit of foreshortening. That's it. Those are the techniques, the 3 techniques used for space. Okay, and then we have, let's get up close in the, for the formal analysis, I would keep it simple. And I'll say this, if it is on the actual exam, I will say this and make it easier for you. You don't have to analyze the formal composition of the bottom panel. That's too much detail. So we just did the space techniques, the 3 of them. Now, what about color? Well, pretty obviously, God here has a bright red robe that makes him warm. Mary has blue, which, by the way, is symbolic of royalty. So you could add that as a fact on the meaning, but you've already finished those notes. You don't have to go back to that. But that is another fact about the meaning. Blue in the Middle Ages and the Renaissance meant royalty. It was a color of royalty. And so she's always shown with blue robes once she has given birth to Jesus, especially after she's dead. So that's why she has blue, but you don't have to get that detail. You can just say the blue is a cool color, as is the green or the green robes or the green robe of John the Baptist. So there's cool colors on either side. And then the gold, which is painted above their heads, almost looks like halos, don't they? Part of their, supposedly the thrones behind them, those are gold, right? Painted wood, I suppose. That's obviously warm. Now here, it's mostly thin lines. I don't see a little bit of bold though. Yeah, there's bold outline around the top of the throne. There we go. Otherwise, all the lines are thin outlines. The modeling is always true in Renaissance painting. You don't even have to guess. You can just say that. It's a given. But where you see it is important. There's strong or realistic modeling and realistic or strong simulated textures on the hair, right, of all 3 of them. The clothing or robes, they're all wearing robes, right? And the skin, which almost all Renaissance paintings did. Now it's almost entirely stable. Look at the figures. They're sitting upright. And there's a slight tilt to Mary's head, that's true, but that's only a small detail. Okay, so let's see. Let's get back down here. I'm going to now show you a closer view of God. You see how sharp and realistic the simulated textures are? The Van Eycks were the first Northern Renaissance artists to use oil paint. Some think the first artists, period. So some historians believe they developed or introduced, I should say introduced the technique of oil painting, but there's no proof of that. They were the first Northern European painters or Northern Renaissance painters to use oil paint. That's how they could do such super sharp simulated texture and modeling. You see it on God's robes and his face. Oh, that's a better, I forgot I had a better lit one. And then Mary here has red roses in her crown, and that actually is an important fact about the meaning. You don't have to add it, but it's one that's easy to see if it's on the exam, so you might want to write it in the margin or down below the meaning notes for this slide. Red roses were symbolic of Mary when she was wearing them in her, on her robes, in her crown here, symbolic of her sacrificing the life of her son, willingly accepting his crucifixion, or his death. She knew he was going to die. I suppose God told her that right at the beginning, a young, painful death at a young age. And she accepted it willingly because that's what God asked her to do. So she sacrificed, in other words, by giving up without any objection, her son's life. Yeah, there's another image. Yes, please go ahead. Go ahead.
If I may, I'm also noticing lilies spaced in between those.
Yeah, good point. You're right. I was trying to not get too many details in because we, don't want to overwhelm you. But you're absolutely good point. You hear that, everybody? Those are the same symbol as was in the first slide, which mean they symbolize her virginity. So she's still the Virgin Mary up here in heaven, right? So the red roses mean her sacrifice of her son, giving up her son's life willingly. And yes, the lilies mean that she still was a virgin even after going up to heaven.
Do the lilies also have anything to do with death? Because a lot of times lilies can symbolize death.
I've heard that too. It's funny because when I was a kid, too many funerals with too many flowers. And I got to where I couldn't stand the smell of certain flowers because I associated them with funerals. I had a lot of uncles that died of cancer in their 50s, They worked in a polluted auto plant in Kokomo, Indiana, which had a high death rate. Gee, big surprise. There was no EPA back then. Anyway, yes, I think you're right. Lilies were often used in funerals. I don't know if this far back, I'm not sure, but it sounds like you've done some research. So you could say that, but the main purpose in a Renaissance religious painting is to symbolize her virginity. Okay, I think that's, yeah, and the lines, like I said, are thin, except for on the back of the throats. Okay, now we get to maybe, but it is the most interesting painting of the evening. Most people agree anyway. I'm going to ask in a few minutes if anyone here has been to the National Gallery in London. That's where this painting is. Okay, this is the Wedding Portrait. Now, if you looked it up in Stockstead, it's a much longer title. I always try to give my students a break. Well, why have a 6 or 7 word long title if you can? People agree that it's okay to call it the Wedding Portrait. Why? Because the most famous portrait of the Renaissance, anyway, of a wedding. Just the wedding or wedding. You don't have to say the Wedding Portrait, 2 words. The artist now is only Jan van Eyck. I'll spell his name again because Hubert had died by this time. Jan, Jan, and then his last name again, 2 words, V-A-N, and then E-Y-C-K. 1434. I'm sure a lot of you, maybe most of you, have seen this painting. It has a very rich set of symbols, but let's start with what does it depict? Okay, this painting is obviously, if there's 2, the brother of the Van Eycks, he's a Northern European, so it's an early Northern Renaissance painting. And remember, they had mastered the technique of scientific perspective. You can see it on the floorboards. We'll get to the former elements in a few minutes, but the meaning is pretty complex. So I'm just going to give you the highlights. Let's start with the fact that there are disagreements. So I usually say most or many. Let's really be safe and say many historians, including me, believe this painting depicts an actual wedding ceremony as a gift the husband gave to his wife. We know who they were. We don't have to guess, and you don't have to know for the exam. But if you want to know, this painting is usually listed, and I think Stockstead does, as the Arnolfini, and then his wife's maiden name, I forget that name, Wedding Portrait. That's a lot to say in one title. We just say Wedding Portrait, most historians. So just say most or many, again, many historians believe this depicts an actual ceremony that occurred in the husband's house. That's not so unusual. I got married in the house I was renting when I was living then at this house. I couldn't afford a church. So not everybody got married in a church, even if they were very religious. So this depicts a wealthy couple in Belgium. I'll say it again. And that many historians believe is the actual wedding ceremony depicted by Van Eyck, Jan van Eyck, as a wedding present to, of course, there's the arrow, to the wife, would have been his fiance then, right? But once they were married, to his future wife. Okay, there is another theory that this is a reenactment of a ceremony that might have occurred somewhere else, but you don't even have to write that because there's no reason why this couldn't depict a wedding ceremony that happened in the man's house. It was not uncommon in the Renaissance to do that. We know he's wealthy. How do we know? Well, look at that hat. That is the biggest hat in the history of painting. I had a student go to the museum in Bruges. It's in Bruges, Belgium. This house is still there. They know who these people were. Their houses, they probably got married in that house, is still there. And it's open by appointment, I think, for historians and visitors. Anyway, just say that they're wealthy because of the clothing. We can tell that. And the furniture, my goodness, a brass chandelier, a fancy mirror, a huge bed, and oranges. Oh yeah, that's really unusual. Oranges were really unusual in Northern Europe. Of course, in Italy, they were everywhere. So they imported these oranges, and he's wearing a fur-lined coat and a huge hat, and she's got a fancy dress. So there's plenty of detail that indicates that they are very wealthy. We know who he was too, not just his name. You don't have to know that, but just you should write this. He was a wealthy merchant from Italy, and his wife also was an immigrant from Italy, and they were living in Belgium. Just write it the way it sounds. Don't worry about spelling the word Belgium. Some of you know how to spell the country, Belgium. And so therefore they were exporters. or he was. She wasn't. She stayed at home and had children. We know they had several children. We know a lot about this couple. So the fact is he was wealthy by importing, probably oranges, among other things, goods from probably Italy. What else would it be, right? And became quite wealthy and lived in Belgium and married and raised a family there. Those facts, there's no debating. But what about her? Some of you may already have thought of this. What about the way she's holding her dress? Anybody have any thoughts about what that might indicate or not?
She's pregnant.
That's a good guess, and for decades I thought so. Most
I was
historians,
about to say that.
yeah, most historians now almost certainly it's not that. And how do we think, or why do many historians think she's not pregnant? For three reasons, and it's part of the meaning. So you should write these. I'll say them slowly and repeat them. She is most historians now. It's not just a few or many. It's a majority now. Believe she was not pregnant for three reasons. First of all, they are business people. Well, he is a businessman living in a foreign country. It would be a huge scandal if he waited to marry this woman until she was so pregnant she was showing. That's a sin, according to the Catholics. They were all Catholics, I remember that, all of Western Europe. So it would have been a sin, and it would have ruined his reputation and probably his business. So waiting until she was pregnant, very unlikely. The second reason, and this is the best evidence that she's not pregnant, is that's such a common pose among women of all ages, from young, pre-teens all the way to 80s and 90s-year-old women who clearly couldn't be pregnant. It's a pose because of the dress. Look at the dress itself. See, she had to lift it up to walk across the room and take his hand during the ceremony, is what most historians believe. It is merely a common pose for women at that time who wore this kind of a dress. It does tend to indicate, that she's, right, wealthy, because she can afford he bought, I'm sure, the dress for her, of course. But in order to walk in it, see down here, she has to pull part of it up so that that's not any indication of pregnancy. It's not that she couldn't be, but it's unlikely. Here's the third and probably best reason most historians do not believe she was pregnant during the wedding or before the wedding. Yeah, right, during and before the wedding in this painting. Because we know the birth dates of their first child, and it wasn't only a few months after they married. Now, of course, it's possible she had a 6 or 7 month pregnancy and tried to hide it, and then the child was stillborn, and then she got pregnant again. It's possible, but there's no evidence for that. So all three of those things taken together, everybody got those three, are really good, solid evidence, though not 100% proof, that she's probably not pregnant. The last part of the meaning is maybe the most interesting. The dog, I'll just tell you, it symbolizes fidelity, meaning they will remain faithful to each other during their marriage. The shoes, look, those are her shoes. They're wooden, of course. They're in Belgium, where people used to wear wooden shoes, and they don't much anymore, but Holland and Belgium, right? So these wooden shoes, just say shoes. The shoes being off means they're in their stocking feet. You could say barefoot, but they're not technically. So just say their shoes removed, the two pairs of shoes being removed from them, indicate that they're on or standing on holy ground. That is an absolute, unequivocal, 100% guarantee. When you see a Renaissance painting where one or more of the people in the painting have their shoes off, they're on holy ground. Why is this holy ground? Because they're doing a ceremony in the sight of God. And here's the evidence for the fact that we're going to get closer here. I forgot. Yeah, look at this. Look at the mirror. The mirror shows Jan van Eyck and a priest conducting the ceremony. And it says right there, as part of the meaning, Jan van Eyck was here 1434. He was a witness to the wedding. He sketched it first, of course, and then painted it later. Obviously, he didn't paint it while they were standing there. So that's why we believe it was a live ceremony that he depicted from real life. In any case, we also know God is in the room because of the extinguished candles. Look closely. And if by now you should recognize, right, that candle, is burned out. And so is this one. One of them is burning, but most of them are extinguished. Remember, that is always a symbol for God's spirit being in the room. And then the final thing is the fertility of this couple, that they will, I think they had like 5 children. Whoops, I meant to go the other way. Let's get back to the full view. Here we go. Okay, so what we see here is the last symbols you should add now are the bed. The prominent placement of the bed indicates that they are going to go ahead and have many children. They did, I think it was 5, I don't know, just several. They had several children, which there are records of course, because they were a well-known couple at the time, and there were records of the births of their children. The oranges also symbolize fertility. So the bed symbolizes future fertility or healthy children being born to this family. Or you could just say to her, of course. And then the oranges are also a symbol of fertility, as well as of wealth. And like, I forget who it was that said that good comment on the last slide. Some objects in a painting, not just in the Renaissance, but often then, can have more than one meaning. Like lilies can mean both virginity and, you know, death, possibly. But here, the oranges symbolize both their wealth, just by being there, as rare as oranges were in Northern Europe then. A, and B, they also symbolize fertility. Okay, that's plenty on the formal analysis. Let's do, I mean, on the meaning, I apologize. Now, let's do the formal analysis. Okay, what do we have here? We have balance. Oh, this is well balanced. She's, right, if you took the height, they're almost equal, because her dress is down here, even though her head is lower than his top of his hat. But he's standing a little higher than she's. They're well balanced, roughly, of course. It's roughly balanced left to right. And I would absolutely say top to bottom, because you've got the chandelier here and the dog here, right? The window and the, you know, wall here and the bed over there. I'd call it roughly balanced. If you feel differently, then that's fine. You just have to explain that. This has a high probability, I will tell you that, of being on the midterm. It's such an important painting. Anybody here seen it? Anybody here been to the National Gallery in London? No, I thought one or two people. If you ever go there, I don't know how it ended up in London instead of either Belgium, Holland, or even Italy, where this couple was from. But anyway, that's where it is in London, the biggest art museum, the National Gallery. It's tiny. The whole painting is not more than about 14 inches tall and about 10 inches wide. Look at the detail in this. It's amazing. That's what a master painter could do. Super sharp, realistic, simulated texture. So let's do the elements now on everything, on the chandelier, on the mirror, on the floorboards, on the clothing, on their skin, everywhere. Warm colors on the bed and on his robes, cool colors on her headdress and her dress, warm on their skin. And again, cool on his shoes, warm on, you see plenty of both the colors, warm and cool. And then we have the lines all thin. There's no bold outlines around their bodies and all the furniture. It is almost entirely stable. Look carefully, but the only things dynamic are the arms of the chandelier and the round mirror, well, at the top of his head. So some details up here, but they're standing upright, totally. Even the dog is really. The bed, the walls, the window sill, the framing. I mean, it's mostly stable, but there are several dynamic details. For space, we have.
That?
Sorry, go ahead.
Again, can you repeat that, please?
Yeah, it's almost entirely stable. Look carefully; everything's upright except for the details near the top of the hat, his hat, of course, the mirror, and the chandelier. But all the rest of the room, the objects are all stable, and they're upright, right, straight, standing upright. Okay, and then we have for space, I already mentioned, so you should already written, but if you didn't, definitely go ahead and write. This has scientific perspective. It just screams at you. Look at these diagonals, very carefully disguised or worked into the floorboards, right? And they all would disappear or meet at a vanishing point behind the wall if they kept going. So that has scientific perspective because you can see the diagonal lines. And then there's obviously overlapping. Their clothing overlaps their bodies, and they overlap all of the room behind them, of course. Even the dog overlaps the floor. Lots of overlapping. There is foreshortening, absolutely. On the window, of course, in the bed, very clearly foreshortening, right? There's no atmospheric perspective. The indoor scenes don't have that. It's only landscapes in daytime, remember, that can have atmospheric perspective, so that's not here. Okay, so those are the major techniques of In fact, the only techniques for space. Let's see, what else is there? Oh, the largest mass. That's a close call, but I'd say it's her, because her dress is so wide. And then him, and then probably the bed behind them, because you can't see much of the bed. Okay. Oh, balance. Yeah, I already said it's balance. Now, here's what we're going to do. We are going to try to get this. I have to go to another file, which I should be able to do. Oh, shoot, I forgot I hadn't done that. All right. If I recall correctly, all of the other ones are on another file. Yeah, I'm pretty sure I altered. Yeah, we covered those last week. So what we need to do is we go out of this file. Hang on, it'll just take a couple minutes. Okay, we'll do the screen sharing again in a minute. I need to pull them up, and they are, it takes about a minute. Yeah. Oh yeah, let me get that out of there. Whoops. Oh, why did that go away? Oh, yeah, Zoom has some glitches. It always has. Okay, there we go. Whoops, 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 whoops. Okay, you guys. Pictures, here we go. Now, finally. Okay. It's being bulky tonight. That's what I call this. Okay, so here we go. We will do the Renaissance. Let's see, those are, and we have two more, so don't go away. And then we should end still a little bit early tonight. In fact, I'm sure we will. Okay, so this should be it here. Actually, Baroque, yeah, that should include. Why is it not coming up? Come on. Hang on. Sometimes it just takes, there we go, it's just being bulky. There we go, Renaissance. Okay. Let's see, what is the next one? I sometimes alter the order in which they're seen. Jacob, the Church of San Dome of Florence. Dome of Florence. Okay, so we're going to do the Dome of Florence Cathedral. And that's here. So now it's going to be your first architecture slide. Well, we had one last week. Okay. Let me get to the screen sharing. All right, screen share. Now we should be able to get back to it. Whoops. All right. Let's get this larger. All right, so this is the next slide. Must know, okay? I'm not saying it's so important I won't cut it from the study list, but assume anytime I give you notes on a slide that it has a possibility of being on the test. Okay, this is the Dome of Florence Cathedral. Florence is F-L-O-R-E-N-C-E. The Dome of Florence Cathedral. The artist is an architect, of course. Architects are artists. We just can say the architect of this is Brunelleschi. I will say his name and spell that one twice because it's such a long name. B-R-U-N-E-L-L-E-S-C-H-I. Again, B-R-U-N-E-L-L-E-S-C-H-I. Brunelleschi. How I remember Italian names is I took Italian Renaissance art at Berkeley, and we had hundreds of slides, remember, not dozens. Is by saying their name and pronouncing it slowly, phonetically, syllable by syllable. And that'll usually help you. And there's always double consonants in Italian last names. Maybe there's a few exceptions. So it's two L's, right? Brunelleschi, 1436, so you can just say 1430. So what have we got here? We have the Cathedral of Florence. As you, I'm sure, all know, it's a major city in Italy. It's the birthplace of the Renaissance. You don't have to write that, but that is a fact. But this building is not a Renaissance church. Only the dome is the Renaissance style. We'll say why in just a minute. First, the facade, right? That's a word you're going to probably want to use on, well, maybe both exams, but certainly on the midterm. in any architecture slide or any work or piece of architecture, the facade is the front. So the facade of this building is Gothic. It's earlier. Just say it's a couple hundred years or a few hundred, you can keep it simple, a few hundred years older than the dome. So the church was built without a dome originally. Probably just had a flat roof, because see, this is flat. In fact, I know it did. This section had a flat roof, and so did the rest. When it was finished in the late Middle Ages, you can say it that way, there was no dome. It was in the late Middle Ages, that's called Gothic style. The facade, the front of the building. Then in the Renaissance, early Renaissance, Brunelleschi was hired to design this dome. So who was he? That's part of the meaning. He was the first, this is simple and easy, I will say it twice to remember. Brunelleschi was the first great Renaissance architect. He was the first great Renaissance architect. Nobody debates that point. He is the first architect in Europe to reintroduce, there's no other way to say it. Romans invented domes. If you took art 2.1 or 1.1, you know that, or just know about ancient Rome. So just say, since the fall of Rome, or for over 1,000 years since ancient Rome, you can say there had been no domed buildings anywhere in Europe. Pretty surprising if you think about it. So this, I'll say it again, was the first domed building of the Renaissance. Or another way to say it, you could write it both ways, is that means it was the first dome building in Europe in over 1,000 years. So that's a major breakthrough. That makes this building really important, obviously, therefore the first truly Renaissance style dome. And Brunelleschi is the architect who reintroduced domes to Europe, to European architecture. I mean, they were around, of course, in Roman ruins. Some of those survived, you know that, right? All over the ancient Roman Empire, there were dome buildings, but they were over 1,000 years old. So he reintroduced the dome, but he did something new. And this is part of the meaning, the other part of it. With this dome, he built two different structures. So just say it's a double. I try to keep it simple. This is a double dome. The outer section, or shell, you can say, if you want to say shell or outer section, is made of stone, right? That's the first of the two sections. The inner section is a wooden framework which supports the outer dome. So it's an inner and outer dome, two domes. The inner dome is made of wood framing, and that supports the outer dome. Of course, the outer dome is stone, as you can see from this slide, and that rests on the wood. It may sound like, well, what's the big deal? But nobody else had thought of doing it. The Romans didn't do that. It's a very creative idea for making a bigger, heavier dome. This dome is bigger than the ones that most Roman, well, actually there is one bigger Roman dome, but it's rare. The one in the Pantheon in Rome is even bigger, but most Roman domes are ancient domes from the ancient world. We're nowhere near this big. This is, here we go, part of the meaning. It is one of the largest Renaissance domes ever built. It's over 330 feet high. When you go to the top here, it's over 330 feet. And two more facts about the meaning, and then we'll do a formal analysis. And then one more slide, and then I think that's right. Then we'll actually definitely end early. But these two slides are pretty important. This one is even more important than some of the others because it's architecture. Okay, so what is that little room up there? It is a room resting on top of the dome. It's called a cupola, C-U-P-O-L-A. You don't have to know that. There is no, definition you're going to have on this exam, on the midterm or in this class, where you have to write it out. But just when you see one, if this slide, if it's on the midterm, you'd want to mention it. You don't have to, but it's one of the facts about the meaning. It's easy to remember because it stands out. It's obviously not part of the dome itself. It's resting on top of the dome. So a cupola is a room resting on top of a dome or a roof. Anybody been to the Petaluma campus before the shutdown? You took any classes in person at Petaluma? In any of the main buildings?
Yes.
Yeah, at night. Notice when you walk across the campus, if you look up, I know people don't often do that, there are cupolas on top of every building, and I don't know what those are for. Don't write this. But my daughter, first time she ever came up there with me, she was in middle school, and of course this is middle school humor, but it was an interesting observation. We got in the elevator to go to the second floor where I was teaching my class the night that she visited with. This was like about 6 years ago. And it had 3 levels. You know, the elevators there, they wouldn't, you know, first floor, second floor, and then M. And I said, wow, I wonder what that stands for. Maybe that's how you get to the mezzanine. She said, oh, that's the marijuana level. That's where you go when you want to smoke. No, it probably means mezzanine, but that doesn't fit. There's not a mezzanine. Those are actual cupolas. And why they're on those buildings, I have no idea, because that campus was built long before I started teaching at Santa Rosa College. Might be an interesting topic for extra credit if you care to. Why so many cupolas only on the Petaluma campus, not the Santa Rosa? Anyway, don't write any of that. Now back to what you do need to write. All right. So Brunelleschi designed this dome to, in other words, here's the definition of Renaissance. Remember, I gave you at the start of tonight's slides, which is that it's a revival of ancient classical art and learning, but in this case of ancient classical architecture, which clearly it is. He looked at ancient Roman domes since they were all over Italy, and he figured out how to not only make this bigger than most of them, but stronger and with a new method of a double dome. Right. So there's the whole meaning on this. All right. Formal analysis. Yes, please go ahead.
So the cupola at the top of this dome, was there any particular purpose to it? Or
you're right. I apologize. Excellent. You guys ask good questions and it keeps me honest. Yep, you're right. That's an important detail. Last fact about the meaning. Why are there cupolas? I don't know about the ones on the Petaluma campus. I don't know anybody's ever gone up there. But in this one, anybody been here to Florence? I've been to this cathedral twice, and both times the cupola was closed. The whole dome was closed. But normally you can climb up the stairs. Of course, there's no elevator, and have a view to die for. I've talked to students, and even some have shown slides for extra credit in my classes who've been up there. I envy them. I couldn't go. It wasn't open 2 times. I don't know why. But anyway, so what is the purpose? To write it in a single sentence is the last thing about the meaning, and then we'll do the formal analysis. Cupolas were used for people for two purposes. One was to provide views of the scene below, usually a city. So you could say the city streets or the city below, or you could just say to provide a view of the scene below, right? And this was the tallest structure. The top of that dome, where the cupola is the highest structure in, it was, I don't know if it still is, but I think it is. There's no skyscrapers in Florence. They don't allow them. The second purpose is to admit light. So it's a good thing you asked that question. Thank you. Here we go. These windows all admit more light into the building than you would get from just these little side windows, because here the light is just going to go straight sideways, right? The sun, you know, during the day. Rarely are you going to get light coming through these windows that's going to hit the floor and go all the way to the bottom of the building and shine on the people below. But this, yes, they do, because they're in every direction. There's like 12 of them or something, these windows. They admit light. So one more time, the purpose of cupolas is 2 reasons, 2 functions. One, to allow for views of the scene below, you know, for visitors to have those views. And the other is to admit light to the into the church, into the building, you could just say, but they're always on churches. In the Renaissance, they were always on church. So it admits light into the down to all the way down to the floor of the building. So it brightens up the interior. Right, formal analysis. Warm colors are only present here on the tile, and that's tile over the dome. The dome itself is made out of marble, different colors of green and white marble. And that's some other kind of stuff. That's not marble. Marble wouldn't have been like that. So that's probably, who knows, granite. So just say the different kinds of stone are all off-white, therefore cool as is the cupola too, right? Only the only warm colors are on the tile work. And a little bit down below, actually, that's true. There's brick here. We're only talking about this section. It's dynamic. This is totally dynamic. I mean, the only thing stable, you can't maybe just this little bit of a buttress here at the bottom of each of these stone reinforcements here, but you don't have to get that detail. Just say it's almost entirely dynamic, because domes by definition are curved, and the cupola is round, right? Well, not quite. See carefully. If you look carefully, it's more multi-sided, but it's almost round, and the spire is definitely rounded, right? So this is entirely dynamic. And here the masses are easy to break down. The dome itself is the largest mass. There's just 3. Then the base, because he only designed everything above that. So the base is the second largest mass. Then cupola is the 3rd largest. Pretty straightforward. For space, it's a real open domed room. this creates a real open dome room with a ceiling over 330 feet tall. It's open here, by the way, the cupola, or else you couldn't see the sunlight coming through these windows. So that counts as part of the space. So the whole thing, again, I'll say for space, is that it's a large, open, domed room with a ceiling over 330 feet tall. There you go. That's the real space.
Is the dome uneven, or is that just the angle?
No, the dome's not uneven at all. Yeah, it's probably the angle, I guess. I see what you're thinking. I've seen the real thing. So see this, it completely corresponds. They're the exact same length. Yeah, I guess that is, I never had anyone ask that, but I see why you're asking. Oh, it's totally symmetrical. Yes, and therefore balanced. So that's a good point to bring up. From left to right, but obviously wider at the bottom. So unbalanced toward the bottom because it gets narrow when you get to the cupola, especially. So it's unbalanced toward the bottom, but balanced left to right. If you draw a line down the middle of any section, it will be symmetrical. If you stood right in front of it or saw a drawing of it, a blueprint. The blueprints for this are they're still around. They're in a museum on fascinating hand-drawn blueprints from 600 years ago. And then we have the rhythm. These are called ribs. You could use that word. You could say stone reinforcement, but ribs is actually the short way to say it. And almost all domes have them somewhere. In this case, they're visible on the outside because the outside dome, remember it's two domes, one inside the other, is all made out of stone. So that creates rhythm, as do the windows in the cupola and the porthole. You can just say round, but the right word is porthole windows in the base. Lots of rhythm. And then we have the textures are real like they are in most buildings. They are smooth on the clay tiles, smooth on the stone ribs, smooth on the cupola, which by the way, I believe is marbled again, but it doesn't matter. You can just say stone, smooth stone, and then smooth that is marble for sure on the base. So those are all real textures and they're all smooth. Well, glass too in the windows. Yeah, right. Real smooth textures, no rough textures, no simulated textures. And here there is that looks painted, but it's not. Look carefully. See, you can see it up here. That's not painted. It may seem painted, but it's not. It's inlays. Very complex technique. Inlaying, right? One color of marble, dark green, against the white marble background. So just say there is a visual line created, as there are in most buildings, by the marble patterns. And I don't see any at the corners here. If you could see this corner, it might have. So the visual lines here are limited, in this photo at least, just to the patterns on the marble. There's no carved or painted lines, none. And the modeling is just, the shadows from the sun. There isn't much in here. This must be like near noon, high noon, just a little bit around that window. So there's no technique for modeling. I think that's most of it. Yeah. Okay, let's go to the next one. I can't remember. I know I've cut at least one or two, but let's see. Yeah, I took this out, so you don't have to know about it. Wait a minute. I know what I have to do. That's for next week. We're going to have fun with that. Here we go. This is the next must know. And this one doesn't take very long. I've already spelled the architect's name, Brunelleschi, so you should have that in your notes, and it's on the syllabus. But the name of this is the Church of San Lorenzo. I always think of the town in the southern Alameda County, south of Oakland. Not that San Lorenzo. I'm sorry, I'll spell it. Church of San, S-A-N, of course, for saint in Italian. Lorenzo, L-O-R-E-N-Z-O. Brunelleschi, remember, has two L's. And the date of this is 1446, so it's 10 years later. All you have to say, again, if it's on the exam, which I'm not saying it will be, I'm not saying it's so important, I won't maybe cut it. But for now, take these notes. That he, remember, was the first great Renaissance architect. And he lived in Florence, the birthplace of the Renaissance. After he did the dome, he got a lot of other commissions. A lot of other work, you could say, but the right word is commissions, architectural commissions. Of course, because he created a masterpiece. This was one of them. This church, the main part of the meeting is pretty straightforward and pretty simple. Won't be too long for you to take notes, but this is a Renaissance style church. What does that mean? It has three features that all Renaissance style Renaissance style church interiors had, all of them. These three features. absolute bilateral symmetry. These are identical. You can see that. Everything on the left and right, completely mirror image. The right word for that is bilateral symmetry, or you can just say symmetrical, just totally symmetrical, therefore completely balanced. All Renaissance church interiors, Renaissance style church interiors had that. Another is a combination of columns and arches, or columns supporting arches. There's a word for that. They're called arcades, but that might confuse some of you with before the pandemic shutdowns with video arcades, right? Or
Yeah.
right. So I wouldn't use that word if you don't want to. Just say a combination of columns and arches are found inside every Renaissance style church. And the last thing might seem odd to some of you, a flat roof. The flat roof was one of the main features of Renaissance churches. And I did mention that the cathedral we just saw before had a flat roof except for the dome. Now, this church doesn't have a dome. It's not big enough or wealthy enough, or they'd have enough of a budget. The domes are expensive, right? Whenever and wherever they're created, they're the most expensive part of a building. So this doesn't have a dome. I've been inside this church, but it has those three features, okay? And that's the whole meaning. And then who was Bertolucci? I already told you. So that's pretty easy, those notes on the meaning. Formal analysis, cool gray color on the floor. They're tiles, of course, but you can say floor and the walls with the columns and arches. A warm color on the ceiling. Kind of, it's gold, actually. It might be real gold painted onto wood or plaster. Anyway, and so then the textures are real smooth marble on the columns, real smooth tiles on the floor, and real smooth stone on the walls. And then the ceiling is almost certainly also real smooth. It's either painted wood or I think it's plaster. Yeah, I haven't been in this church in a long time. It's probably plaster. Indicates it's smooth. There's no rough textures, no simulated textures here. If you could get up close, I suppose you could see, yeah, little flowers. So if you want to say yes, there's some minimal or limited amount of simulated texture on the ceiling because of the carved wooden flowers, you could say that. Wood or plaster, it's hard to say. I don't know. Doesn't matter. Just keep it simple. You don't have to mention that's a minor detail, but almost all the textures are real. And then we have the rhythm, of course, of the columns and the arches and the tile on the floor repeated over and over the shade, even the round windows. I already said it's balanced, but I would also want to make the case top to bottom, because if you do, the rest of the roof goes out here, even though it's looks like it's cut off. Don't forget the ceiling, I should say, not roof. I meant ceiling. The ceiling is the same width as the floor. So it's completely balanced. Any way you look at it, left to right, top to bottom. So the largest mass, well, because the ceiling is divided into segments, you know, on the sides and the main, you could say the floor. So the floor is the largest mass. Then the ceiling, then the columns, and then the arches, in that order. The floor first, ceiling second, columns, and then the arches. Okay, and then we have modeling here. There's shadow coming in from the windows from the sun. And here there's visual line, as all buildings have, at the edges, you know, on the edges of the ceiling and around the edges of the columns, which is created by the modeling, of course. And then the patterns of the tile have this not painted or carved, but visual line. It's dynamic, of course, on the arches and the windows, stable on everything else, on the floor, the columns, the walls, but there are dynamic details. And let's see, the rhythm, yeah, definitely has the rhythm. I already said that. Okay, color, cool, yeah, I already did that. Okay, we have one more. We should still be able to end early. And let's go back to, yeah, you're getting a preview of next week. There it is. Yeah, the next must know, the last one for tonight. I'll keep it as short as I can, because what is it now? Yeah, we'll probably end about 9:24. So this is the last must know. Jacob and Esau. Jacob is two figures in the Bible. Their first names. Jacob, of course, Jacob, and Esau, Esau. The artist's name is Ghiberti, Ghiberti. Ghiberti, 1425. I promise you I will be cutting at least 30% of the slides before the midterm. So I'm not saying this one is one I'm absolutely going to keep or not. But for now, remember, as always, take good notes, because you do the review, we do it together. Then you'll know if I cut it or not, but it could be on the exam. This is a bas relief. So here's your last definition. Sorry. Bas relief, B-A-S. It's on your handout, so I shouldn't have to spell for you. So bas relief, it's below triptych. It's a short definition. I know, it's getting late. It's a two-dimensional work of art with raised figures off of a flat background. Again, a two-dimensional work of art with raised figures off a flat background. That's exactly what this is. You're going to see bas reliefs in other parts of this class, but this is the first one we've seen. And it uses scientific perspective. The main fact about the meaning, what makes this so important, is it is the first work of art in the Renaissance to use science that we know. Okay, I got to say it again. I apologize. It's the first known example in Renaissance art of scientific perspective. Here are the diagonals. You see them, and they're all, you know, carved into this panel. By the way, it's a metal panel on the door of, this part of the meaning, where is it? It's on the door of the baptistry. Just write that as it sounds, with a P, with a P. Baptistry, B-A-P-I-S-T-R-Y, but you don't have to worry about that spelling. Write it how it sounds. It's a panel, one of 16, but you can just say several panels. On the door of the baptistry at Florence Cathedral. That's a pretty important fact. If you go to San Francisco, you can see an exact replica of this done by this same workshop, the exact same workshop in Italy, 600 years later, of course. The people who did this were dead. And that's on Grace Cathedral. You all know where Grace Cathedral is, right? The top of Nob Hill in San Francisco. It's been in every movie practically filmed in San Francisco. That church has replicas of these doors, all the doors. So just say it again, to keep it short, it's one of many panels, or several, to say several panels on the door of the baptistry in front of Florence Cathedral, or the baptistry of Florence Cathedral. Baptistry is a word that means a building, separate building for baptisms, of course. Yeah. Okay, so it's on the doors of that small building in front of Florence Cathedral, and it's the first example of the first known example of scientific perspective. So Ghiberti, some people credit him with inventing this technique, where these lines, these diagonal lines, see them, they all would meet at a vanishing point way out in the distance. You don't see a horizon. Yes, question?
First known example of what?
Scientific perspective that we've been talking about now. You see the diagonals right on the floor.
Okay.
Yeah, right. That's it. Yeah, that's an important fact about the meaning. The other part of the meaning isn't as important. What does it show? What scene? It's a scene from the Bible where two Jewish prophets, Jacob, I don't know which one is which, the two old guys here, two older men, or oldest men in this, are prophecies. They're telling the future. A prophet is someone who can tell the future. So here they are, just say that they're meeting with or talking to people in front of a wealthy man's house. You don't need to know whose house. That's getting too much detail. This is just say a scene from the Bible that depicts two of the early prophets from the Bible. Their names are in the title of this, Jacob and Esau. They're meeting with people, or talking, you gotta say talking to people in front of a wealthy man's house. Okay, that's plenty on the meaning of this. And then we'll wrap it up with a quick formal analysis. It is obviously warm. If it isn't obvious, it's a bronze color with gold overlapping or overlay. That's called gilding. Some of you know that word, to cover in gold, to gild, G-I-L-D, right? You don't have to worry about the spelling. It has, gold over it. Now it's faded. This is an old slide. They've restored it since this slide was taken. This isn't my slide. This is from the slide library. Anyway, you could just say that originally it was totally covered in gold, but either way, bronze or gold, it's a warm color, right? Since the bronze shows through more now, it doesn't matter. They're both earth tones, right? Shades of gold and yellow. No cool color here. Here, the simulated texture is superb on the clothing and the hair and on the floor tiles. These would be tiles or stone maybe, but the tiles made out of stone. So just say tiles. The floor tiles and even the arches, right? This is the entry to a rich man's house. You go through here and all the fancy rooms are inside. So you could just say porch. The porch shows, simulated texture on the columns and the arches. Everything is super sharp and realistic. That's all done with what kind of line? Carved. That's the only way you can do that. With a sculptural panel like a bas relief, you carve the line. So all the line is carved here. And then we have the modeling. Well, if you didn't have shadows, you couldn't see the figures, right? That's what a bas relief is. Without modeling, without shadows around each figure, you wouldn't see the details. So this has very strong modeling, as does all bas relief. You see the shadows right there and there. And then we have, is it stable or dynamic? Mostly stable on the bottom. Most of the figures are standing upright. Look carefully. And so are the columns, but the arches, of course, the rows of arches are dynamic. And then these two figures are somewhat dynamic. So there's some dynamic detail, but most of the objects, the people and the building, mostly are stable. For space, it's got scientific perspective. Obviously, I already mentioned that with the diagonal lines, right? And then it has overlapping. Of course, the figures overlap the background. And then we have foreshortening. The floor has foreshortening, and I would even argue the ceiling, but you can't quite see the edges of it. Just say that there's overlapping of all the objects, in the front over the background, mostly people. And then, of course, already said scientific perspective, and then there is foreshortening on the floor. Let's see, the only other things, rhythm. The human bodies all have, heads, arms, legs, and in the robes create rhythm, the folds of their robes, as well as the columns and the arches. Lots of rhythm. And is it balanced? I think it's roughly balanced, but I've had students say, oh, no, if you draw the line here, there's more figures on the lower left. So I will go ahead and accept that. It's slightly unbalanced or somewhat unbalanced toward the left. Definitely it is unbalanced toward the bottom, right? If you do a line across here, there's almost nothing but empty space and, well, arches and one person above the middle there, which, by the way, is another scene from the Bible you don't need to know about. So just say the upper part is mostly open space, and therefore the figures almost all the figures being below makes it unbalanced toward the bottom. And I think that's, the largest mass, and then we'll be done. The largest mass, I'd say it's the floor. If you take the whole space of the floor, because the arches might be the second largest if you count these as one mass, which I would, right? Or the wall with columns and arches if it's all one section. But the floor goes much further back than that. So the floor first, then the columned arches or the wall above the floor, and then this group of women. If you count that as one mass, I would. Then that is the third largest mass. And then I guess this group here, they all look pretty much connected, visually at least. And then you don't have to go to the fourth. The three largest masses is enough. And that would be perhaps the other prophet there, and that one person in the lower right corner, or the fourth largest masses. Okay, we're 5 minutes earlier than we might some days actually go to 9:30, but most nights I try to end 5 or 10 minutes early at least. But I stick around to answer any questions you have about anything we've covered tonight, or anything having to do with extra credit or grading and stuff. Any questions, anybody?
What did you describe the rhythm as being in this particular part?
Yeah, plenty of it. The human bodies, arms, hands, legs, heads, all the human body parts. And of course, the columns and arches. You could even say the floor tiles if you want. There's a lot of rhythm, repeated shapes. Yeah. Okay. And any other questions? I'll stick around until everyone has a chance to ask.
Yes. Aside from the reading, are you gonna ask us to do any other check-in for a homework assignment?
No. It behooves all of you, and my kudos to everyone who didn't disappear during the break. We only lost a handful of people. That's not bad, but you'll find out that's your benefit to do. Just to attend the lectures, and then because you can always watch them again, if something happens and you can't, you get disconnected or otherwise you have an emergency at your house. But if you're here during the live lectures, you're going to get much better chance of getting an A, because you can ask these kinds of questions and you'll understand things better. But you can always watch any of these lectures during the following, after 7 p.m. on Friday each week. But that's it. It's the reading and the 4 assignments. Now do I hear a dog or a kid? The midterm, final, and the 2 papers. There's no quizzes and no other assignments. And then extra credit is an optional thing for everybody. Okay, that's the good question.
So I haven't get the syllabus yet.
Okay, you must have joined after the first week before class, which is fine. I'm sorry I didn't know that, but I couldn't have sent it to you during the lecture. I can send it to you tomorrow. Would you email me at aol.markw, right? You know my AOL email. And I will send it to you as soon as I see your email. You know, like tomorrow, not at 5, but much earlier than that. I don't know, 2 or 3. In the afternoon tomorrow. I will send it to you tomorrow. Okay.
Is there more details as far as how to present the homework?
Well, I just said there isn't any homework. You're just reading.
The paper, how to do the papers.
Oh, next week. Yeah. Make sure that you're here for the whole evening next week. That's an important point you're asking about. I will send you a sample of a paper by attachment. It'll be a PDF so you can look at it or print it out. And I will send you a 1-page summary. I said this at the beginning, but I guess you joined us late maybe. It's the 5 requirements for your paper. We're going to go over them together as a class, and I'll answer all your questions then. The start of week 3. Okay.
Okay.
Right. Yeah. All right. Anybody else? Any other questions?
Since you weren't here the first week, if you put your email in the chat, I can send you all of my notes that I took during the lecture.
Oh,
last
that's
week.
good. Yeah, people are really good about helping each other. That's great. Well, at this point, I think, unless I'm still here, if there's another question or two, because obviously that's in essence my office hours are, by appointment, i.e. by email or voicemail at any point, and or right now at the end of each class. Any other questions before we call it a night? Thank you all for your interest, your patience, your comments, your questions. All right, I'll see you all next week. All right, and look for that handout of the 5 requirements, because that will, of course, be very useful for you when you get ready to write your papers. Okay, good night.
Good night.
Good night, everybody. Take care. Have a good week.
Good night. Thank you.
You're welcome. Take care.